The collar of her orange jumpsuit twisted in his fist. Officer James Dale's breath, coffee, and contempt hit Evelyn Bell's face as 200 witnesses watched in silence. "You people never learn," he hissed loud enough for the courtroom to hear. But Evelyn didn't flinch. Her father had died in handcuffs, just like these in a cell, just like the one she'd spent the night in. Dale didn't know the woman he was humiliating had spent 3 years building the case that would destroy him. He didn't know the federal badge hidden in evidence lockup. He didn't know that every second of his hatred was being recorded. Stay with me until the end of this story. Comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this truth travels. The Richmond County Courthouse had seen 43 years of what the locals called business as usual. Marble floors worn smooth by the shuffle of the accused, wooden benches that had cradled the weight of mothers who'd lost sons, fathers who'd lost daughters, families who'd lost faith. Morning light cut through the high windows in pale geometric patterns, illuminating dust particles that danced like evidence no one bothered to collect. Evelyn Bell stood in the holding cell adjacent to Courtroom 7, her wrists bound in steel that had oxidized to the color of dried blood. The orange jumpsuit they'd given her smelled like industrial detergent, and fear the same smell that had clung to her father's clothes the last time she'd hugged him through plexiglass 17 years ago. She was 34 now. He'd been 36 when they buried him. "Inmate 4701 on your feet." The guard's voice carried no malice, just the mechanical indifference of a man who'd said the same words 10,000 times. He was younger than Evelyn probably didn't remember when her father's case had made headlines for exactly one news cycle before disappearing into the archived silence where inconvenient truths went to die. Evelyn stood. She'd learned to move slowly in custody. Any sudden gesture could be interpreted as aggression, and aggression justified anything that came after. The shackles around her ankles allowed for steps of maybe 8 inches. She'd measured them the night before, lying on the concrete bunk, calculating exactly how many steps it would take to cross the courtroom when the moment came. 147 steps. The hallway between holding and courtroom stretched like a tunnel. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with an electrical hum that Evelyn had learned to read like a heartbeat monitor. Steady buzz meant steady power. Flickering meant someone somewhere was about to have a very bad day in a very dark cell. The lights weren't flickering today. The guard, his name tag read Morrison, walked 3 paces behind her. Protocol. Always keep distance from inmates, never turn your back. Always maintain the illusion of control. Evelyn had studied every procedure, every protocol, every loophole in the system. That's what 3 years embedded in the Department of Justice's Public Corruption Unit taught you, how to be invisible while collecting evidence that would make you impossible to ignore. "Big crowd today," Morrison said, almost conversational. "Judge Hollowell's cases always draw spectators. People love watching him work. People love watching him perform," Evelyn thought. Judge Marcus Hollowell had perfected the theater of justice. The dramatic pauses, the thoughtful frowns, the way he'd remove his glasses and clean them while deliberating a fate. He'd been doing it for 19 years, long enough to build a reputation, long enough to build an empire, long enough to forget he was supposed to be serving the law, not serving himself. The courtroom doors opened with the kind of groan that old buildings make when they're tired of keeping secrets. The room fell silent as Evelyn entered. 200 faces turned toward her like satellites locking onto a signal. She recognized some of them journalists who'd covered corruption scandals, activists who'd been fighting police brutality since before Evelyn was born, family members of victims who'd learned that case dismissed and justice denied were often the same thing. And there, standing near the prosecution table with his arms crossed and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, was Officer James Dale. He was bigger than she remembered from her research files. 6'3" shoulders like a linebacker, hands that had thrown too many punches to count. 42 years old, but moved like someone younger, someone who'd never faced real consequences and didn't believe he ever would. His uniform was crisp badges, polished to mirror brightness. The American flag pin on his collar positioned at exactly the regulation 15-degree angle. Everything about him screamed order and authority. Everything about him was a lie. Evelyn kept her eyes forward as Morrison guided her to the defense table. Her court-appointed attorney, a woman named Sarah Chen who looked about 12 years old and exhausted, stood and offered a tight smile that was probably meant to be reassuring. "Ms. Bell," Chen whispered as Evelyn sat. "I reviewed the charges again this morning. The prosecution's evidence is circumstantial at best. We have a good chance if we—" "Just follow my lead," Evelyn said quietly. Chen blinked. "I'm sorry. When the time comes, follow my lead." Before Chen could respond, the bailiff's voice boomed across the courtroom. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Marcus Hollowell." The room stood in a choreographed wave. Evelyn rose slowly, her shackles clinking a sound that seemed to echo louder than it should, like chains rattling in an empty cathedral. Judge Hollowell entered from his chambers like an actor taking the stage. 61 years old, silver hair swept back in waves that probably cost more to maintain than most people's monthly rent. His robe billowed dramatically as he climbed to the bench, and Evelyn watched him settle into his leather chair with the satisfaction of a king mounting his throne. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. He didn't recognize her. Why would he? The last time Marcus Hollowell had seen Evelyn Bell, she'd been a 17-year-old girl sobbing in the back of his courtroom while he ruled her father's death in custody was justified use of force, and sealed the case records to protect the integrity of the investigation. There had been no investigation. There had been only silence. "Please be seated," Hollowell said, his voice warm and judicial, the kind of voice that made you believe in the system even as it ground you beneath its wheels. The courtroom settled with a collective rustle of fabric and shifting weight. Officer Dale stepped forward without being called. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who'd testified hundreds of times. "Before we proceed, I need to address a security concern." Hollowell's eyebrows rose. "Proceed, Officer Dale." Dale turned to face Evelyn, and his expression transformed. The professional mask slipped just enough to reveal something cold and gleaming underneath the look of a predator who'd spotted prey that couldn't run. "This defendant," Dale said, taking 3 deliberate steps toward Evelyn, "has been non-compliant since booking. Refused to answer questions. Refused to cooperate with processing. I believe she poses a flight risk and a danger to this court." Evelyn felt every eye in the room shift to her. She kept her breathing steady, her posture relaxed. This was the opening move exactly as she'd anticipated. Dale was establishing dominance, reminding everyone who held the power in this room. "Officer Dale?" Sarah Chen stood, her voice surprisingly firm. "My client has been fully cooperative. There's nothing in the arrest report that suggests your client." Dale interrupted, taking another step closer to Evelyn, "was found with materials that suggest extensive planning. Maps of government buildings, photographs of law enforcement personnel. This isn't some petty crime, Your Honor. This is potentially domestic terrorism." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Journalists leaned forward, phones suddenly in hands despite the no-recording policy. This was the kind of allegation that turned routine proceedings into headlines. Evelyn watched Dale's reflection in the polished surface of the defense table. He was close now, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive trying to mask something cheap. "Your Honor." Chen's voice rose above the whispers. "These allegations are inflammatory and unsupported by—" "Unsupported." Dale's laugh was harsh, performative. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder, holding it up like a trophy. "I have photographs right here. Maps of this very courthouse. Images of judges, prosecutors, officers. Tell me, counselor, what innocent explanation exists for that?" Hollowell leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. "Let me see that file, Officer Dale." This was the moment. Evelyn could feel it crystallizing around her like ice forming on glass. Everything she'd planned, every move she'd calculated, had been leading to this exact sequence. Dale approached the bench, turning his back to Evelyn. That's when it happened. As Dale handed the file to Hollowell, his foot, whether deliberately or not, it didn't matter, caught on the leg of Evelyn's chair. She didn't move fast enough, couldn't move fast enough with the shackles. The chair tipped, and Evelyn fell sideways, her shoulder hitting the floor hard enough to send pain radiating down her arm. The courtroom gasped. But Dale wasn't done. "Attempting to assault an officer," he shouted, spinning back toward Evelyn. Before Morrison or Chen or anyone could react, Dale grabbed Evelyn by the collar of her jumpsuit, hauling her upright, with enough force that her feet briefly left the ground. The fabric twisted around her throat. Evelyn's hands, still cuffed, came up instinctively, not to fight, but to prevent strangulation. Dale's face was inches from hers now, and his eyes held something that transcended professional duty. This was personal rage, old and deep and hungry. "You people!" he hissed, quiet enough that only Evelyn could hear the full venom, never learn. 200 witnesses. Every single person in that courtroom watched Officer James Dale choke a handcuffed woman in orange, and for 3 eternal seconds, no one moved. Evelyn didn't struggle, didn't scream, didn't give him the satisfaction of fear. She met his eyes and smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but Dale saw it. Confusion flickered across his face. Why wasn't she afraid? Why wasn't she fighting? What did she know that he didn't? "Officer Dale!" Hollowell's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Release the defendant immediately." Dale dropped Evelyn. She stumbled but didn't fall, and when she straightened, her expression was completely calm. Not defiant, not angry, just waiting. Morrison rushed forward, positioning himself between Dale and Evelyn. Sarah Chen was on her feet, hands shaking as she pointed at Dale. "Your Honor, I demand Officer Dale be removed from this courtroom. That was assault witnessed by everyone here." The murmurs swelled to actual conversation now. Phones were definitely out recording despite the rules. This was the kind of moment that went viral, that sparked hashtags that made careers and destroyed reputations. Hollowell's face had gone red. "Officer Dale, step back, now." Dale raised his hands in a gesture of compliance, but his eyes never left Evelyn. "My apologies, Your Honor. The defendant's sudden movement startled me. I reacted on instinct, as I'm trained to do." "Sudden movement?" Chen's voice cracked with disbelief. "She was shackled to the chair. She fell because Officer Dale knocked her chair." "I saw what happened," came a voice from the gallery. An older black woman in the 3rd row stood, her church hat tilted at an angle of righteous anger. "That officer deliberately tripped her, then grabbed her like she was nothing. I saw it plain as day." "Ma'am, please sit down," Hollowell commanded, but his tone had lost some of its authority. The courtroom was slipping out of his control, and everyone could feel it. Another voice joined. "I saw it too. He knocked her chair." Then another. "Someone record this. The world needs to see." Hollowell's gavel came down 3 times, each strike harder than the last. "Order! I will have order in this court, or I will clear the gallery." The room settled into a tense silence, but the energy had changed. Something had broken, not just furniture, but the invisible agreement that made courtrooms function. The agreement that said authority was legitimate, that uniforms meant protection, that justice was blind. Evelyn remained standing, her collar still twisted from Dale's grip. She made no move to straighten it. Let them see. Let the cameras catch every detail. Let the evidence speak in a language everyone could understand. "Ms. Bell." Hollowell said, his voice now carefully controlled. "Are you injured?" "No, Your Honor." Evelyn's voice was steady, clear. She'd practiced this tone for years. Not submissive, not aggressive, just factual, just honest, the hardest tone to dismiss. "Officer Dale, you will return to the prosecution's side of the courtroom, and you will remain there." Hollowell's command was steel-wrapped in silk. "Any further outbursts, and you will be held in contempt. Am I understood?" Yes, Your Honor. Dale's jaw was tight, a muscle twitching beneath his ear. He walked back to the prosecution table, his movements stiff with barely contained rage. Sarah Chen helped Evelyn back into her chair, a new one since the previous had been knocked over. "Are you sure you're okay?" she whispered. Evelyn nodded. Her throat hurt where the collar had twisted, and her shoulder throbbed where she'd hit the floor, but pain was temporary. Evidence was forever. "Let's proceed," Hollowell said, clearly eager to move past the incident. "I've reviewed the file Officer Dale provided. Ms. Bell, you're charged with criminal trespass, possession of surveillance materials, and conspiracy to commit an act of domestic terrorism. How do you plead?" Evelyn stood again. This was usually when defendants said not guilty or guilty, and the machinery of justice ground forward in its predetermined path. But Evelyn had spent 3 years studying how the machine worked, how the gears turned, where the weaknesses were. "Your Honor," she said, "before I enter a plea, I'd like to submit evidence to the court." Hollowell frowned. "Ms. Bell, that's not how this works. You'll have opportunity to present evidence during trial, but this is an arraignment. You simply need to—" "I'm aware of procedure, Your Honor, but the evidence I have is directly relevant to these charges and to the legitimacy of my arrest." Sarah Chen grabbed Evelyn's arm. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "We didn't discuss this." Evelyn ignored her. "Your Honor, the photographs and maps that Officer Dale characterized as suspicious were actually part of a lawful investigation. An investigation that's been ongoing for 37 months and has documented extensive corruption within the Richmond County law enforcement and judicial system." The courtroom, which had been settling into uneasy quiet, erupted again. Dale was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is clearly a deflection tactic." "An investigation authorized by whom?" Hollowell interrupted, his face now pale instead of red. That was interesting. Fear looked different than anger, even on a judge who thought he'd built an untouchable empire. "By the United States Department of Justice," Evelyn said clearly. "Public Corruption Unit." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Hollowell's hand, reaching for his gavel, froze halfway. Dale's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Sarah Chen stared at Evelyn like she'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "That's impossible," Dale finally managed. You were arrested for this is ridiculous." Evelyn turned to face him fully. "I was arrested because my investigation got close enough to make you nervous. Officer Dale, the question is, what exactly are you nervous about?" "Your Honor." The prosecutor, a thin man named Gerald Vance, who'd been silent until now, leaped to his feet. "This is highly irregular. If the defendant has some affiliation with a federal agency, there are proper channels for—" "I submitted proper notification to the Richmond County District Attorney's Office 14 hours ago," Evelyn said. "A formal declaration of federal jurisdiction and a request to suspend all local proceedings pending review of my investigation materials." "We received no such notification," Vance sputtered. Evelyn smiled again, that same small smile that had confused Dale minutes earlier. "That's interesting, because I have a signed receipt from your office's night clerk, Timothy Morrison. He logged it at 11:47 p.m. last night." Morrison, the guard who'd escorted Evelyn from holding, stiffened. All eyes turned to him. "Timothy Morrison," Evelyn continued, "is your cousin, isn't he? Officer Dale's second cousin on your mother's side. He's worked in the DA's office for 6 years. Strange that a federal notification would disappear between the night clerk and the prosecutor's desk by morning." The puzzle pieces were falling into place, and Evelyn could see understanding dawn on faces throughout the courtroom. This wasn't incompetence. This was orchestration. "Your Honor." Hollowell's voice had lost all its warmth. "I'm going to need to see verification of these claims before—" "Of course." Evelyn nodded to Sarah Chen. "My attorney has been provided with documentation." Chen, still looking stunned, reached into her briefcase with shaking hands. She pulled out a folder, not the flimsy court-appointed attorney's folder, but an official Department of Justice document sleeve with the federal seal embossed in gold. She opened it, scanned the first page, and her eyes went wide. "Your Honor." Chen's voice barely above a whisper. "These appear to be authentic federal credentials and investigation authorization papers. Appear to be—" Hollowell leaned forward. "Bring them here." Chen approached the bench. Hollowell took the documents, and Evelyn watched his face as he read. She'd memorized every word on those pages. Badge number 4701, the same number they'd assigned her as an inmate. A coincidence she found almost poetic. Authorization signed by Deputy Attorney General Raymond Chen, dated 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days ago. Scope of investigation: public corruption, civil rights violations, and racketeering within the Richmond County criminal justice system. Targets multiple, including law enforcement officers and judicial officials. Hollowell was reading the target list now. Evelyn could tell because his hand started to tremble. His name was on that list. Third from the top right after Officer James Dale and District Attorney Mitchell Langston. "This is a forgery," Hollowell said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Call the DOJ verification line," Evelyn suggested. "The number's on page 3. They'll confirm my status within 90 seconds. Nobody moved. The courtroom had become a frozen tableau, 200 people collectively holding their breath, watching a judge realize that the woman in shackles held power. He couldn't comprehend that the system he'd corrupted for nearly 2 decades was about to examine him under a microscope. "Your Honor?" Dale's voice cut through the silence, loud and aggressive. "This is obviously a con, some kind of desperate attempt to—" "Shut up, James." The command came from the prosecution table from Gerald Vance, and it was sharp enough to snap heads around. Vance was staring at his phone, his face ashen. "I just got an email from the Attorney General's office. Federal agents are en route to this courthouse right now." The courtroom exploded. Journalists were standing shouting questions. Spectators were on their phones, texting, posting, calling. The bailiff was yelling for order, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos. And through it all, Evelyn Bell stood perfectly still in her orange jumpsuit and shackles, watching the foundation of Marcus Hollowell's empire crack beneath him. Dale was the first to break. He moved toward the courtroom doors, not running exactly, but walking with the kind of speed that suggested prey remembering it had predators. "Officer Dale, stop!" Hollowell's command was reflexive, but Dale didn't even slow down. Morrison moved to intercept, but Dale pushed past him. The doors flew open, and Dale disappeared into the hallway, his footsteps echoing back like countdown seconds. "Bailiff, secure this courtroom." Hollowell was standing now, his composure completely shattered. "No one leaves until—" "Until what, Your Honor?" Evelyn's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Until you can coordinate your story, until you can destroy evidence, until you can make the same calls you made 17 years ago, when my father died in your jail." The room fell silent again, but this silence was different. This was the silence of revelation, of understanding, clicking into place. Hollowell stared at Evelyn, and she watched recognition finally dawn in his eyes. "Thomas Bell," he whispered. "My father." Evelyn's voice didn't shake. She'd cried all her tears years ago, had screamed all her rage into pillows, in empty apartments, had promised her father's grave that she would turn grief into purpose. "You ruled his death justified, sealed the records, told my mother that some cases were too complex for families to understand. Ms. Bell, I—" Hollowell's hand went to his throat, like he was the one being choked now. "He was arrested for a broken taillight." Evelyn continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. "Officer James Dale was the arresting officer. My father complained of chest pains. Dale ignored him. My father died of a heart attack in a cell alone, begging for help that never came. The autopsy showed he'd been beaten. The investigation showed nothing. Your ruling showed nothing. But I showed up to every hearing. I sat in those back rows. I watched you perform justice while denying it." "That was a long time ago," Hollowell said weakly. 17 years. And in those 17 years, how many other Thomas Bells have there been? Your Honor, how many other cases did you seal? How many other families did you silence? Before Hollowell could answer, the courtroom doors burst open again. 6 people in FBI windbreakers entered, moving with the practiced efficiency of a team that had coordinated this moment down to the second. Leading them was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Special Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI Public Corruption Unit. She announced, her voice carrying natural authority that needed no gavel. "Judge Hollowell, you need to step down from the bench. This courtroom is now under federal jurisdiction." Hollowell didn't move. "You have no authority to—" "I have a federal warrant." Torres held up a document. "Signed by 3 different judges and authorized by the Attorney General himself. You're under investigation for corruption, civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You can step down voluntarily, or we can remove you. Your choice." For a long moment, Hollowell just sat there, his empire crumbling in real time. Then slowly he rose and descended from the bench. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone: a king leaving his throne, a judge becoming just another suspect. "Agent Torres." Evelyn said, her voice calm, despite her racing heart. "Officer James Dale fled the courtroom approximately 90 seconds ago. He's likely trying to reach his vehicle in the east parking structure." Torres nodded to 2 of her agents, who immediately left. "And someone needs to secure Timothy Morrison at the DA's office," Evelyn added. "He's the night clerk who intercepted federal documentation." "Already being handled," Torres said. Then she walked to Evelyn, and her expression softened fractionally. "You did good work, Bell. Damn good work. But you scared the hell out of us when you let yourself get arrested." "Had to get inside the system," Evelyn said. "Had to see how they'd react when they thought they had all the power." Torres pulled out a handcuff key. "Let's get these off you." The shackles fell away with clicks that sounded like cell doors opening. Evelyn rubbed her wrists where the metal had chafed and realized her hands were shaking now. 3 years of maintaining cover, of being someone else, of swallowing rage and fear and grief, it was finally over. "Wait." Sarah Chen's voice was small. You really are a federal agent?" "Special investigator," Evelyn corrected gently. "I'm not FBI, but I work with the DOJ on deep cover public corruption cases." "But you let him." Chen pointed to where Dale had been standing, her face cycling through confusion and anger and awe. "Why didn't you defend yourself?" "Because I needed him to show everyone exactly who he is," Evelyn said. "I needed 200 witnesses to see him grab a defenseless woman in shackles. I needed it on camera, undeniable, impossible to explain away. You can deny paperwork. You can deny recordings. You can't deny what everyone in this room saw with their own eyes." Torres was organizing her team, securing the courtroom, but she paused to add, "Sometimes the best evidence isn't what you find. It's what you let them reveal about themselves." One of the agents returned. "Dale's in custody. Found him trying to delete files on his phone. We've secured it for evidence." "Excellent." Torres turned back to Evelyn. "You ready for phase 2? Evelyn looked around the courtroom. At the journalists recording everything. At the activists who'd been fighting this fight for decades. At the families who'd lost people to a system that valued order over justice. Her father should have been here to see this. But Evelyn was here for him. "I'm ready," she said. Torres nodded and addressed the courtroom. "For those recording, and I know several of you are, this is what accountability looks like. Over the next 48 hours, federal agents will be executing warrants throughout Richmond County. We will be making arrests. We will be seizing evidence. And we will be giving voice to every victim who was told to stay silent." She paused. Let that sink in. If you have information about corruption in this county's justice system, if you've been intimidated or threatened, or paid to look the other way, now is the time to come forward. We have witness protection. We have resources. And we have someone who spent 3 years of her life making sure that when we moved with enough force to change everything. Every eye in the room turned to Evelyn. She thought about her father, about the promise she'd made to his grave. She thought about every person who'd been ground up by this machine. Every family that had been told their grief didn't matter. Their truth didn't count. "My name is Evelyn Bell," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom, to every camera, to every screen that would broadcast this moment. "My father was Thomas Bell. Officer James Dale arrested him for driving while black. Judge Marcus Hollowell ruled his death justified. And for 17 years I lived with the knowledge that the system that was supposed to protect us had murdered my father and called it justice." The courtroom was absolutely silent now. I became a lawyer because I believed in justice. I joined the DOJ because I realized justice doesn't happen in courtrooms. It happens when someone is brave enough to drag corruption into the light. This investigation isn't about revenge. It's about making sure no other daughter has to grow up knowing her father died begging for help that never came. Evelyn took a breath. Every case that Judge Hollowell sealed, every arrest that Officer Dale falsified, every victim that this system silenced, we have documentation, we have evidence, we have testimony, and starting today, we're going to make sure that everyone hears what they tried so hard to bury. Torres stepped forward. "The DOJ has established a hotline for witnesses. The number will be released within the hour. We urge anyone with information to come forward. Your voices matter. Your stories matter. And this time, people will listen." An older black man stood in the gallery. Mr. Jerome Washington. Evelyn recognized him from her research. His son had died in custody 8 years ago. Case sealed. Investigation closed. Justice denied. "My boy didn't have to die," he said, his voice breaking. "They told me there was nothing to investigate. Told me to accept it and move on." "We're listening now, Mr. Washington," Evelyn said softly. Another person stood, then another. Within minutes, a dozen people were on their feet, each with a story of corruption, of abuse, of silence, enforced by the very people who'd sworn oaths to serve and protect. This was what justice looked like when it finally broke free. As federal agents began processing the scene and taking preliminary statements, Evelyn felt exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. 3 years of carrying secrets, of being someone else, of watching injustice happen while collecting evidence it had cost her relationships, sleep, pieces of her soul she'd never get back. But it had been worth it. "Bell." Torres approached with a phone. "Deputy Attorney General Chen wants to speak with you." Evelyn took the call, stepping into a corner for relative privacy. "Evelyn, I just watched the live streams." Raymond Chen's voice was warm with pride and sharp with concern. "You deviated from the plan. The plan called for a quiet arrest after I submitted evidence." Evelyn acknowledged. "But Dale gave me an opportunity to make this public, to show the world exactly what we were fighting. You could have been seriously hurt." "I was hurt 17 years ago, sir. Today was just documentation." Chen was quiet for a moment. "Your father would be proud." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I hope so. The Attorney General is calling a press conference in 2 hours. We want you there. We want your voice leading this." "I'll be there." As she ended the call, Evelyn noticed someone approaching, a young woman, maybe 22, with tears streaming down her face. "Ms. Bell." The woman's voice shook. "My name is Carla Jennings. My brother Tyon. He was arrested 3 years ago by Officer Dale. They said he had drugs. He didn't. He died in jail before trial. They said it was suicide, but Tyon would never... He would never... Evelyn took Carla's hands. "Tell me everything. We're listening now. We're finally listening." And as Carla began to speak, her words tumbling out between sobs, carrying 3 years of grief and rage and unheard truth, Evelyn understood that this was just the beginning. The courtroom had been the opening act. What came next would determine whether justice was just a word or whether it could actually mean something real, something that could heal wounds carved deep into generations. Outside, sirens announced the arrival of more federal vehicles. Inside, people were finally telling stories that had been locked away by fear and corruption and the terrible weight of powerlessness. And in the corner of the courtroom, Evelyn Bell, daughter, lawyer, investigator, survivor, listened to Carla Jennings and thought about her father. "This is for you, Dad. Every word, every truth, every moment when silence breaks and justice finally gets to speak." The morning sun shifted, and the light in the courtroom changed from pale yellow to something almost golden, illuminating dust and truth in equal measure. Carla Jennings's hands trembled in Evelyn's grip, her words spilling out in fractured bursts between sobs. Tyon was 19. He'd just gotten accepted to community college. He wanted to study engineering. He was driving home from work when Dale pulled him over, for they said speeding, but Tyon never sped. He was so careful, always so careful. "Take your time," Evelyn said softly, guiding Carla to a bench. Agent Torres appeared beside them with a bottle of water, her expression transforming from federal authority to something more human, more grieving. Carla drank, coughed, continued. "Dale said he smelled marijuana. Tyon didn't even smoke. Dale searched the car and found a bag under the passenger seat. Tyon swore it wasn't his, that he'd never seen it before, but Dale arrested him anyway. At the station, Tyon kept asking for his phone call. They never gave it to him. My mother and we didn't even know he'd been arrested until the next morning when they called to say he was dead." The courtroom had transformed into something between a confessional and a crime scene. Federal agents moved through the space documenting everything, while witnesses continued to emerge from the gallery, each carrying stories that had been sealed in silence for too long. Evelyn watched Agent Torres signal to one of her team members, a younger agent named Marcus Reeves, who immediately began setting up recording equipment. "Ms. Jennings," Torres said gently, "would you be willing to give an official statement on record?" Carla nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I want everyone to know what they did to my brother. I want his name cleared." "Then let's start from the beginning," Torres said, pressing record. As Carla began recounting every detail of that terrible night 3 years ago, Evelyn felt the familiar weight of other people's grief settling onto her shoulders. This was the part they didn't tell you about in law school, how carrying justice meant carrying pain, how every victory was built on a foundation of stories so heartbreaking they changed the shape of your soul. A commotion at the courtroom entrance pulled Evelyn's attention. 3 uniformed officers from the Richmond PD had arrived, their faces hard, with something between confusion and anger. The lead officer, a sergeant named William Frost, whose personnel file Evelyn had memorized months ago, scanned the room until his eyes locked on Agent Torres. "What the hell is going on here?" Frost demanded, his hand instinctively moving toward his service weapon. "We got a call about federal agents disrupting a court proceeding." Torres didn't even glance up from her notepad. "Call your chief sergeant. He's been briefed on the federal jurisdiction transfer." "Federal jurisdiction over what exactly?" Frost's voice rose, drawing attention from everyone in the courtroom. "You can't just storm into our courthouse and—" "Your courthouse." Evelyn stood, her voice cutting through Frost's bluster. "Sergeant Frost, do you remember a case from 8 years ago? Marcus Washington Jr. died in custody. You were the investigating officer. You ruled it accidental, sealed the file within 48 hours. Frost's jaw tightened. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who's been reading your reports very carefully." Evelyn pulled out her phone, scrolling to a scanned document. "Your investigation concluded that Marcus Jr. slipped and hit his head on a bench. But the autopsy, the real one, not the edited version in the official file, showed injuries consistent with being beaten. Fractured ribs, internal bleeding defensive wounds on his forearms. That autopsy was sealed for family privacy, Frost said, but his voice had lost its certainty. No, Evelyn said coldly. It was sealed because it contradicted your predetermined conclusion. And do you know who signed off on sealing it? Judge Marcus Hollowell, the same judge who's currently being detained by federal agents. Mr. Jerome Washington Marcus Jr.'s father stood again from the gallery. His voice cracked with 8 years of suppressed rage. You told me my boy was clumsy. Told me he fell. You looked me in the eye and lied while my son was in the ground. Frost took a step back, his hand falling from his weapon. The other 2 officers with him exchanged glances, clearly recalculating their understanding of the situation. Sergeant. Torres finally looked up, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. I suggest you and your officers leave this courthouse and wait for official notification from your chief, unless you'd like to be added to the list of persons under investigation. Frost opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked out. His fellow officers followed their retreat, feeling less like a tactical withdrawal and more like rats abandoning a sinking ship. The moment the door closed behind them, Evelyn felt her phone vibrate. A text from an unknown number. Storage Unit 247, East Richmond Facility. Check before they do. Her heart rate spiked. Only 3 people knew about Storage Unit 247 herself. Deputy A.G. Raymond Chen and her field supervisor, Agent Patricia Marks. That unit contained backup copies of every piece of evidence Evelyn had collected over 3 years. Documents, recordings, photographs, financial records, everything. Torres, Evelyn said quietly, moving to the agent's side. I need to check on something. It's urgent. Torres read something in Evelyn's expression. Take Reeves with you, and Bell, be careful. If they know about your evidence caches, they're more organized than we thought. Evelyn grabbed her jacket, the one Torres had brought civilian clothes to replace the orange jumpsuit, and headed for the exit. Agent Reeves, a former Marine with observant eyes, fell into step beside her. Where are we going? He asked as they pushed through the courthouse doors into late morning sunlight that felt surreal after the artificial lighting inside. To find out if we still have a case, Evelyn said. The drive to East Richmond took 17 minutes through streets that Evelyn had memorized during her investigation. Every corner held a memory: the diner where she'd interviewed a witness who'd later recanted under pressure, the park where she'd photographed Officer Dale meeting with a known drug dealer who somehow never seemed to get arrested, the apartment building where families lived in fear of the same police who were supposed to protect them. Reeves drove in focused silence, his training evident in the way he constantly scanned mirrors, checked blind spots, anticipated trouble before it materialized. When they pulled into the storage facility, he parked 2 rows away from Unit 247, a tactical decision that gave them sightlines and escape routes. Wait here, Evelyn said, but Reeves shook his head. Torres said be careful. That means I stay with you. They approached the unit together. The lock appeared undisturbed, the dust on the handle suggesting nobody had touched it in days. Evelyn punched in the code, listened for the click, pulled up the rolling door. Empty. Not just empty, swept clean. The filing boxes that had contained 3 years of documentation, the hard drives with encrypted backups, the photographs, the recordings, the carefully cataloged evidence that represented countless hours of dangerous work. All of it gone. Evelyn stepped inside the unit, her footsteps echoing in the hollow space. Someone had even cleaned the floor, removing any trace of what had been stored here. Professional, thorough, terrifying. Bell, Reeves said from the doorway, his weapon now drawn. We need to leave. Now. But Evelyn was staring at the back wall. Someone had left a message written in what looked like red marker. How many copies did you make? The question wasn't a threat. It was tactical intelligence gathering. Whoever had cleared this unit wanted to know if this was the only cache, or if Evelyn had been smart enough to scatter her evidence across multiple locations. She had been that smart. Let's go, Evelyn said, her voice steadier than her hands. As they returned to the car, she pulled out her phone and called a number she'd hoped never to use, her emergency contact at the DOJ, a direct line that bypassed all normal channels. Chen. The Deputy Attorney General answered on the first ring. They found the East Richmond storage unit. It's been cleaned out. Silence on the line then. The Virginia facility. Checking now. Evelyn had 3 backup locations. Virginia was the most secure, the one containing the original documents rather than copies. Sir, someone inside the system knows our protocols. They knew where to look. Or they followed you at some point during the investigation, Chen said, but he didn't sound convinced by his own theory. I was careful. I swept for surveillance. I varied my routes. Not careful enough, apparently. Chen's voice hardened. Check Virginia. If that facility is compromised, we'll need to accelerate the entire operation. I'll notify Torres to secure all suspects before they can coordinate their response. Evelyn ended the call as Reeves pulled back onto the highway. The Virginia facility was 90 minutes away across state lines, chosen specifically because it fell outside Richmond County's jurisdiction. If that location had been compromised, it meant the corruption network extended further than even Evelyn's extensive investigation had uncovered. Talk to me, Reeves said, navigating through traffic. What are we walking into? Hopefully nothing, Evelyn said. Worst case proof that we've been compromised from the beginning. Her phone rang again. Torres. Bell, we've got a situation. Judge Hollowell is demanding his attorney. Says he won't answer questions without counsel present. That's his right, Evelyn said. His attorney is District Attorney Mitchell Langston. Evelyn's grip tightened on the phone. Langston was target number 1 on the investigation list, the apex predator in Richmond County's corrupted ecosystem. If Hollowell was using Langston as his attorney, it meant 2 things. They were coordinating their defense, and they believed they still had enough power to fight back. Don't let them talk privately, Evelyn said. Everything on record. Already done. But Bell Langston's arguing that all our warrants are fruit of a poisoned tree. Says your undercover operation was illegal, that you falsified credentials to gain access to restricted areas. That's ridiculous. Every step was authorized. He's got paperwork, documents showing that certain authorizations were never properly filed with state officials. And he's arguing that without state cooperation, federal jurisdiction is questionable. Evelyn felt ice forming in her chest. Those authorizations were filed. I saw the confirmations. Well, someone's made them disappear. Langston is calling for an emergency hearing to dismiss all charges and have you arrested for fraud and impersonating a federal officer. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. The cleaned storage unit. The missing authorizations. The coordinated response. This wasn't just corruption. It was a well-oiled machine designed to destroy anyone who tried to expose it. Torres, Evelyn said carefully. We need to assume they've been planning for this contingency. They knew someday someone might investigate them, so they built fail-safes into the system itself. How deep does this go? Deeper than we thought. Evelyn's mind raced through the evidence she'd collected, trying to remember which documents were irreplaceable originals versus copies. Tell Langston his emergency hearing can wait until I return to Richmond. I'm securing additional evidence. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves they didn't destroy everything. Evelyn ended the call and turned to Reeves. How fast can you drive? The agent's response was to press the accelerator, and the speedometer climbed past 80. They made it to the Virginia facility in 73 minutes. This unit was in a more upscale storage complex, the kind with security cameras and climate control, and 24-hour surveillance. Evelyn had chosen it specifically because it kept detailed records of access times. The manager, a retired military man named Douglas Chen, who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, recognized Evelyn from her initial rental 6 months ago. Ms. Bell, he said, his expression troubled. I was about to call you. We had an incident last night. Evelyn's stomach dropped. What kind of incident? Power outage. Whole facility went dark for about 40 minutes. Security cameras were down. When power came back, we did a sweep. Your unit 247, the lock had been tampered with. Tampered how? Someone tried to pick it. Didn't succeed, but they tried. Left scratches on the mechanism. Douglas pulled up security footage on his computer. This is from yesterday evening before the outage. The screen showed a figure in a maintenance uniform approaching Evelyn's unit. The person kept their head down, avoiding camera angles, but something about the build and movement pattern struck Evelyn as familiar. "Can you enhance this?" Reeves asked, leaning closer to the screen. "Already did. Best I can get." Douglas clicked through several zoomed images. In one frame, the person's sleeve had ridden up, revealing a tattoo on their forearm, a distinctive pattern that Evelyn recognized immediately. "That's Officer Derek Hammond," she said quietly. "Dale's partner. He has that exact tattoo. I documented it during surveillance last year." Reeves was already on his phone calling Torres with the update. Evelyn stared at the frozen image on the screen, her mind reconstructing the timeline. If Hammond had attempted to breach the Virginia facility last night, it meant they'd known about this location for at least 24 hours, which meant they'd been watching Evelyn's movements, tracking her patterns, building their countermeasure strategy, while she'd been focused on the Richmond courthouse drama. "Ms. Bell," Douglas said, "your unit is secure. Whatever they were trying to do, they didn't succeed. Your belongings are safe." Evelyn and Reeves followed him to the unit. The lock showed the scratches Douglas had mentioned but held firm when Evelyn entered her code. The door rolled up to reveal stacks of document boxes exactly as she'd left them. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by suspicion. Why didn't they just cut through the lock or break down the door? "Too obvious," Reeves said, scanning the interior. "These facilities have tamper alerts. A forced entry would have triggered immediate notification. They were trying for stealth." Evelyn opened the first box, checking the documents inside. Everything appeared intact. Financial records showing payments from District Attorney Langston to offshore accounts, testimony transcripts from sealed cases, photographs of evidence that had mysteriously disappeared from police custody. But something felt wrong. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to her documentation photos, the images she'd taken of each box's contents when she'd initially stored them. Comparing the current arrangement to the photos, Evelyn noticed subtle differences. Documents were filed in slightly different order. Some folders had been shifted. "Someone's been through these," she said. "Not removing anything but documenting. They've photographed our evidence." Reeves stiffened. "Which means they know exactly what case we're building. They can prepare defenses, create alibis, manufacture contradictory evidence." "Or," Evelyn said slowly, "they're checking to see if we have the one piece of evidence they can't explain away." "Do we?" Evelyn moved to the back of the unit to a small box marked personal items. Inside, beneath her law school diploma and her father's police funeral flag, was a sealed envelope she'd prepared 2 years ago when the investigation had first turned dangerous. Inside the envelope was a single flash drive. "This," Evelyn said, holding it up, "is every conversation Judge Hollowell and Officer Dale had over a 6-month period. Audio recordings from a wire I wore when I worked as a legal clerk in Hollowell's chambers during my first year undercover." Reeves's eyes widened. "They don't know you have this. They suspect I might, but they can't be sure because the conversations are so damning that if anyone knew I had recordings, I would have been killed years ago." Evelyn pocketed the flash drive. "Hollowell and Dale discussed my father's case, laughed about it, talked about how they'd covered up similar incidents, made plans to continue their operation." "Jesus," Reeves breathed. "This is the nuclear option," Evelyn said. "The evidence that proves it wasn't just corruption, it was conspiracy, premeditation, depraved indifference to human life. This is what sends them to federal prison for the rest of their lives." They loaded essential documents into Reeves's car, prioritizing originals over copies. As they worked, Evelyn's phone rang again. An unknown number, but the area code was Richmond. "This is Bell." "Ms. Bell, my name is Valerie Santos. I'm a nurse at Richmond County Jail." The woman's voice was shaking. "I need to talk to someone about what's been happening in the medical unit. About the people who've died." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Can you meet me? There's a coffee shop on 7th Street, the Daily Grind. I finish my shift in 2 hours." "I'll be there," Evelyn said. "Ms. Santos, are you in danger?" A long pause. "I've been in danger for 6 years, ever since I saw what Officer Dale did to an inmate and was told to put natural causes on the death certificate. I'm done being scared. I'm done being complicit." The line went dead. Evelyn looked at Reeves. "Change of plans. We need to get back to Richmond immediately. And we need protection for a witness." They drove back faster than they'd come, Reeves coordinating with Torres to set up a security team for Valerie Santos. Evelyn spent the drive listening to portions of the recordings on the flash drive, her father's case file playing through her earbuds. Judge Hollowell's voice, tinny through the recording but unmistakable. "The Bell case is getting media attention. We need to shut it down." Officer Dale's response: "Already handled. Autopsy report's been edited. Security footage from the cell block has been corrupted. Without physical evidence, it's just his daughter's word against ours." Hollowell almost casual. "How many does that make this year?" Dale after a pause: 7. "But Bell's the first one with a family who won't stop asking questions." "Then make them stop asking." Evelyn had heard these recordings dozens of times, had transcribed every word, had memorized the casual cruelty in their tones. But each time felt like the first time her father's death reduced to a problem to be managed, a number in an annual tally. 7 that year. How many total? Over 2 decades. By the time they reached the Daily Grind, Evelyn had composed herself. The coffee shop was small, deliberately chosen for its corner location with multiple exits. Valerie Santos sat in the back booth, a woman in her 40s with exhausted eyes and hands wrapped around a coffee cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth. Evelyn slid into the booth across from her, while Reeves positioned himself near the entrance, watching the street. "Thank you for calling, Ms. Santos." "Call me Valerie." She looked at Evelyn with something between hope and resignation. "I saw the news, saw what happened in the courtroom, saw you take down Hollowell and Dale. I realized if I didn't speak now, I'd carry this guilt forever." "Tell me about the medical unit." Valerie's hands shook as she pulled a folder from her bag. "I've been documenting deaths for 6 years. Every inmate who died under suspicious circumstances. Every time I was told to falsify a medical report. Every time Officer Dale or one of his associates would bring someone to the medical unit already beaten half to death, and I'd have to choose between my job and my conscience." She opened the folder. Inside were copies of death certificates, medical reports, photographs taken with what must have been a hidden phone camera. "This is Marcus Washington, Jr. You can see the injuries weren't consistent with a fall. This is Tyon Carter. The toxicology report showed drugs in his system, but I drew that blood. I know it was clean when I sent it to the lab. Someone contaminated it afterward." Evelyn's throat tightened. "How many?" 37. Valerie's voice broke. 37 people died in that jail over 6 years. 17 were ruled natural causes. 12 were ruled suicide. 8 were ruled accidental. Every single one had injuries or circumstances that didn't match the official cause of death. "Why didn't you come forward before?" "Because I was scared. Because I have 2 kids and a mortgage. Because Officer Hammond told me what happened to people who talked too much, said I'd end up like Thomas Bell if I wasn't careful." Valerie wiped her eyes. "But then I saw you today. Saw you stand up to them. And I realized that's the choice, isn't it? Be scared and complicit, or be brave and maybe make a difference." Evelyn reached across the table and took Valerie's hand. "You're making a difference right now. This documentation is exactly what we need." Agent Reeves approached the table, his expression grim. "We need to move, now. 2 Richmond PD units just turned onto this street and they're not on routine patrol." Evelyn stood, pulling Valerie with her. "Back exit." They moved through the kitchen, surprising the staff but not stopping to explain. The alley behind the coffee shop was narrow, lined with dumpsters that provided minimal cover. Reeves had his weapon drawn, checking corners with practiced efficiency. "My car's 2 blocks north," Valerie said. "Silver Honda." They made it 1 block before the police cruisers appeared at both ends of the alley, effectively boxing them in. 4 officers emerged, and Evelyn recognized one Sergeant Frost, the same officer who'd shown up at the courthouse. "Ms. Bell." Frost called out, his hand resting on his service weapon. "We need you to come with us. There's an active warrant for your arrest." "On what charges?" Evelyn demanded. "Fraud, impersonation of a federal officer, and obstruction of justice. Judge Caldwell signed the warrant 30 minutes ago." Judge Caldwell. Another name from Evelyn's investigation, another piece of the corrupted machine. Of course they'd find a friendly judge to sign a warrant. "Agent Reeves is a federal officer," Evelyn said clearly. "We're under federal jurisdiction. You have no authority here." "Actually," Frost smiled. "We do. Judge Caldwell ruled that federal jurisdiction wasn't properly established. You're just a civilian who's been impersonating an investigator. And Ms. Santos..." He turned his attention to Valerie. "You're wanted for questioning regarding theft of medical records." Valerie's grip on her folder tightened. "These records document murder. They document private medical information you had no right to remove from the facility," Frost countered. "That's a felony." Reeves stepped forward, positioning himself between the officers and Evelyn. "Sergeant, I strongly advise you to contact your chief before you make a mistake you can't take back." "My chief," Frost said, "is the one who told me to bring you all in." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. 4 armed officers, 1 federal agent, and 2 civilians in an alley with limited escape routes. Evelyn calculated angles, outcomes, consequences. If they allowed themselves to be arrested, the evidence Valerie had brought would disappear. The investigation would be discredited. Hollowell and Dale would walk free. Her father's death would remain filed under justified. Bell, Reeves said quietly, not taking his eyes off the officers. "I can't shoot 4 cops. We're going to have to trust the system." "The system is corrupt," Evelyn hissed back. "Part of it, not all of it." Before Evelyn could respond, her phone rang. Not a call, an alert. She glanced at the screen and felt her heart stop. The alert was from her dead man's switch, a program she'd set up to automatically release all her investigation files to multiple media outlets if she didn't check in every 12 hours. But the alert wasn't telling her the files had been released. It was telling her someone had tried to disable the program and failed. Which meant, in approximately 90 seconds, unless Evelyn entered an abort code, 3 years of investigation evidence would flood into newsrooms across the country. "Sergeant Frost," Evelyn said, her voice deadly calm, "you have 85 seconds to make a choice. Let us leave this alley, or watch your entire department's corruption become national news." Frost's smile faltered. "You're bluffing." "Try me." 70 seconds. Frost glanced at his fellow officers, uncertainty crossing his face. He pulled out his radio. "This is Frost. Need to confirm the warrant status on static. Just static where there should have been dispatch." "The hell?" Frost tried again. Still nothing. 60 seconds. "Someone's jamming communications," one of the other officers said, checking his own radio. Evelyn's phone buzzed again. A text from Agent Torres. "Federal communications blackout initiated. All Richmond County frequencies blocked. Get to the federal building now." 45 seconds. "What did you do?" Frost demanded, his weapon now drawn, and pointed at Evelyn. "I didn't do anything," Evelyn said honestly. "But my colleagues did. You're cut off, Sergeant. No communications, no backup, no way to coordinate with whoever's telling you what to do. So here's what happens next. You lower your weapons, you let us walk away, and maybe you don't end up in federal prison alongside Hollowell and Dale." 30 seconds. The standoff hung frozen. 4 police officers with drawn weapons. 1 federal agent, 2 civilians. And somewhere in Richmond, a corrupted system realizing it was finally truly being dismantled. Frost lowered his weapon first. "Stand down," he ordered his officers. "All of you stand down." They did slowly, reluctantly. Evelyn entered the abort code with 15 seconds to spare. "Smart choice," she said to Frost. "Now go back to your chief and tell him the federal government doesn't negotiate with corruption. We don't compromise. We don't look the other way, and we sure as hell don't give up." Evelyn Reeves and Valerie moved through the alley at a controlled pace, not running, but not lingering either. Behind them, Sergeant Frost stood frozen with his weapon holstered, watching them leave. His radio crackled with nothing but static, a sound that represented everything his corrupted system was losing control: communication, the illusion of legitimacy. "My car," Valerie repeated, her voice shaking harder now that the immediate threat had passed. 2 blocks. They made it 1 block before Evelyn's phone rang again. "Torres. Where are you?" "Heading north on foot. Frost and his team backed down, but we need extraction." "Federal buildings compromised," Torres said, and Evelyn heard genuine worry in the agent's voice. "Someone called in a bomb threat 10 minutes ago. Buildings being evacuated. We're relocating to the satellite office on Baker Street." "That's across town. We're exposed out here." "I'm sending a team. Stay visible. Stay in public areas. They won't try anything with witnesses." Torres paused. "Bell, we've got 3 more people who've called the hotline in the last 20 minutes. They all say the same thing: they've been waiting for someone to make the first move. You made it. Now they're ready to talk." Evelyn felt the weight of that responsibility settle deeper. Every person coming forward was risking everything based on the belief that this time finally the truth would matter more than power. They reached Valerie's Honda just as the first news van rounded the corner. Channel 7. Their camera operator already filming the reporter. A woman named Jessica Chen, who'd covered the courthouse incident, sprinting toward them with a microphone. "Ms. Bell, Jessica Chen, Channel 7. Can you comment on reports that you've been arrested for fraud?" Evelyn stopped, turned to face the camera. Reeves tensed but didn't intervene. This was the other battlefield, the one fought with words and images instead of warrants and weapons. "I haven't been arrested because I haven't committed fraud," Evelyn said clearly. "I'm a federal investigator who spent 3 years documenting corruption in Richmond County. The same people I've been investigating are now trying to discredit that investigation. Ask yourself why." "District Attorney Langston says you falsified federal credentials." "District Attorney Langston is under federal investigation for accepting bribes, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Of course he's going to claim I'm not legitimate. That's what guilty people do when the evidence catches up to them." Jessica's eyes widened, sensing the bigger story. "You're saying the district attorney himself is corrupt?" "I'm saying we have documentation of payments from Langston's personal accounts to offshore holdings totaling over $3 million across 6 years. I'm saying we have recordings of him coordinating with Judge Hollowell to seal cases and destroy evidence. I'm saying the system you've been told to trust has been systematically betraying the people it swore to serve." The camera operator zoomed in. Jessica moved closer, professional instincts overriding everything else. "What kind of recordings?" Evelyn pulled out the flash drive, held it up for the camera. "Conversations between a judge and a police officer laughing about my father's death. Discussions of other deaths they covered up. Plans to continue their operation. This is what they're afraid of. This is why they're trying to arrest me instead of addressing the evidence." "Your father, you're talking about Thomas Bell. The case from 17 years ago. I'm talking about a man who died begging for help while Officer James Dale ignored him. I'm talking about a judge who ruled that death justified and sealed the records to protect the officers involved. I'm talking about a system that has killed 37 people in 6 years and called every death something other than what it was." Valerie stepped forward, still clutching her folder. "I'm Valerie Santos. I'm a nurse at Richmond County Jail. I've been documenting those deaths. Every falsified report, every covered-up injury, every time I was told to lie on official documents. It's all here. Jessica's producer was now calling for additional camera crews. This was no longer just a local corruption story. This was national news in real time. Ms. Santos, are you saying the jail has been systematically covering up inmate deaths? I'm saying I have documentation of 37 deaths that were ruled natural, accidental, or suicide when they were actually the result of beatings, medical neglect, or deliberate harm. Valerie's voice grew stronger with each word. I'm saying I was threatened with losing my job, losing my nursing license, or worse, if I ever talked. But I'm done being silent. I'm done being complicit in murder. A black SUV screeched to a halt beside them. Not police, but federal. Two agents Evelyn didn't recognize emerged, their credentials already out. Special Investigators Torres sent us. We need to move. But before they could get in the vehicle, another car pulled up. This one was a sleek Mercedes, and when the driver emerged, Evelyn recognized him immediately from her investigation files. District Attorney Mitchell Langston himself, 63 years old, silver-haired and expensive-suited, with the kind of confident smile that came from 3 decades of never facing consequences. Ms. Bell, Langston said, his voice carrying the smooth authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Or should I say, alleged Ms. Bell, since we have some serious questions about your actual identity. The camera was still rolling. Jessica Chen positioned herself to capture both Langston and Evelyn in frame. District Attorney Langston, Evelyn said calmly. I was wondering when you'd make an appearance. I'm here to inform you that Judge Caldwell has issued a warrant for your arrest. You can come peacefully, or we can make this more difficult than it needs to be. Judge Caldwell, Evelyn repeated. The same judge who dismissed 18 excessive force complaints against Officer Dale over the past 5 years. The same judge who sealed the Marcus Washington case within 48 hours. That Judge Caldwell. Langston's smile didn't waver. Judge Caldwell is a respected member of this community who has served with distinction for 15 years. Your allegations are baseless and defamatory. My allegations are documented. Evelyn turned to the camera. Ladies and gentlemen watching this, understand what you're seeing. The head prosecutor of this county is personally attempting to arrest a federal investigator rather than address the evidence of corruption. Ask yourself why a district attorney would leave his office in the middle of a workday to personally handle what should be a routine arrest. Because you're not a federal investigator, Langston said, his smile finally cracking. You're a con artist who's fooled some people at the DOJ into believing your fantasy. Then let's call them. Evelyn pulled out her phone. I have Deputy Attorney General Raymond Chen on speed dial. Would you like to speak with him? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Langston's face. Anyone can claim to have a contact. Evelyn hit dial, put the phone on speaker. It rang twice before Chen's voice came through, clear and authoritative. Bell status. Sir, I'm here with District Attorney Mitchell Langston. He's claiming I'm not a legitimate federal investigator. Would you like to clarify my status? Put him on. Evelyn held the phone toward Langston. The district attorney stared at it like it was a snake, then reluctantly leaned in. This is Mitchell Langston. To whom am I speaking? Deputy Attorney General Raymond Chen, United States Department of Justice. Mr. Langston, Evelyn Bell is operating under my direct authority as a special investigator in the Public Corruption Unit. Any interference with her investigation will be considered obstruction of a federal investigation. Am I making myself clear? Langston's face went from confident to pale. Sir, there seems to be some confusion about jurisdiction. There's no confusion. Federal jurisdiction supersedes local authority in cases of public corruption. Ms. Bell has been operating lawfully under federal protection. You, however, are the subject of her investigation. I suggest you retain counsel immediately. The line went dead. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the news camera still recording, capturing every moment of Langston's humiliation. The district attorney, who'd built an empire on intimidation and corruption, was standing on a public street being dressed down by a federal official while the media documented his downfall. "Mr. Langston," Jessica Chen said, moving her microphone toward him. "Would you like to comment on the Deputy Attorney General's statement?" Langston's jaw worked. He turned to the federal agents who'd arrived to extract Evelyn. "You two, I want to see your credentials." The senior agent, a woman in her 40s with steel in her eyes, pulled out her badge. "Special Agent Maria Cortez, FBI. We're here under orders from the SAC to provide protective custody for a federal witness. You want to interfere with that? I want to see warrants authorizations. And I want to see you step back before I add assaulting a federal officer to your list of charges," Cortez said evenly. "Your choice, Mr. Langston." Langston looked around at the cameras, at the growing crowd of onlookers, at Evelyn standing calm and unafraid, with federal protection surrounding her. The power dynamic had inverted completely. He was no longer the authority figure dispensing justice. He was the suspect trying to avoid accountability. "This isn't over," he said, but the words were hollow. "You're right," Evelyn replied. "It's not. Because in about 3 hours I'm giving a press conference at the federal building. I'm going to present every piece of evidence my investigation uncovered. Every payment you received. Every case you fixed. Every family you silenced. And the whole country is going to watch." Langston got back in his Mercedes without another word, but Evelyn noticed his hands shaking as he started the engine. Fear looked different on powerful men, raw, more desperate, because they'd spent so long believing themselves untouchable. Agent Cortez guided Evelyn, Valerie, and Reeves into the federal SUV. As they pulled away, Evelyn watched Langston's car heading in the opposite direction, probably toward whatever emergency meeting he was convening with Hollowell and the others. Let them plan. Let them strategize. It wouldn't matter. The evidence didn't care about their power. The Baker Street satellite office was a nondescript building that looked more like an accounting firm than a federal facility, which was exactly the point. Agent Torres met them at the entrance, her expression grim but determined. "We've got a problem," she said without preamble. "The Attorney General's office in D.C. is getting pressure from Senator Marcus Wade. He's calling for a review of our investigation, claiming we've overstepped our authority." Evelyn felt ice in her stomach. "Wade's on Langston's payroll. I have the receipts." "I don't doubt it. But he's a sitting U.S. Senator, and when he makes noise, people in Washington listen. They're questioning our jurisdiction, our methods, whether we properly notified state officials before going operational." "We did notify them. I have the documentation." Evelyn stopped. "The documentation that's missing from the DA's office files." "Exactly. They've been covering their tracks for years, building a defense against the investigation they knew would eventually come. And now they're activating every asset they have: judges, prosecutors, politicians, media contacts. This is bigger than Richmond County Bell. This is a network." Valerie, who'd been silent during the drive, spoke up. "How high does it go?" Torres hesitated. "We're still mapping connections, but the financial trails suggest influence at the state level, possibly beyond. Langston didn't build this operation alone. He had help from people with real power." "Then we expose them all," Evelyn said. "Every name, every payment, every connection. We make it too big to bury." "That's exactly what we're going to do." Torres led them into a conference room where several other agents were setting up equipment. "The press conference is in 2 hours. We're inviting every major media outlet. National networks, cable news, print journalists, digital platforms. By the time we're done, this story will be impossible to kill." One of the agents, a younger man named Thomas Park, looked up from his laptop. "We've got a problem with the wire transfer documentation. Someone's filed a motion to seal Langston's financial records, claiming they contain privileged attorney-client communications." "On what grounds?" Torres demanded. "Judge Caldwell signed the order, says the records were obtained without proper warrant." Evelyn laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "Of course he did. Caldwell's probably in the same offshore account records. They're protecting each other." "We can appeal," Park said, "but it'll take time." "We don't have time." Evelyn pulled out her phone, scrolled through her encrypted files. Good thing I made copies before they were officially seized. Digital copies from when I was still operating undercover. Those might not be admissible in court, Torres warned. I'm not trying to win a court case yet. I'm trying to win public opinion. Once people see the evidence, once they understand the scope of this corruption, the courts will have to act. The system only ignores injustice when people let it. Torres considered this, then nodded. Show me what you have. For the next 90 minutes, they prepared. Evelyn walked Torres and her team through every major piece of evidence, the financial records showing millions in bribes, the sealed case files documenting patterns of abuse, the recordings of Hollowell and Dale discussing cover-ups, Valerie's medical documentation of 37 suspicious deaths. But the centerpiece was the flash drive. Evelyn plugged it into the conference room's audio system, and Judge Hollowell's voice filled the room. The Bell case is getting media attention. We need to shut it down. Officer Dale's response. Already handled. Autopsy report's been edited. Security footage from the cell block has been corrupted. Every agent in the room stopped what they were doing. This wasn't abstract evidence or financial records. This was two men casually discussing how they'd covered up a death, how they'd manipulated the system, how they'd done it before and would do it again. How many does that make this year? Hollowell's voice asked. 7. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush bone. That's from 2 years into my investigation, Evelyn said quietly. There are hours more. Discussions of payoffs, strategies for intimidating witnesses, plans for destroying evidence. All of it documented, all of it undeniable. Torres looked at Evelyn with something between respect and sorrow. You listened to them talk about your father like that and kept working the case, kept getting close to them. I don't know if I could have done that. I didn't have a choice, Evelyn said. If I'd walked away, my father's death would have meant nothing. All those other deaths would have meant nothing. Someone had to care enough to finish what everyone else gave up on. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number, another text. They're coming for you tonight, after the press conference. They have a plan. Be careful. Evelyn showed the message to Torres. Anonymous tip, or a trap, could be them trying to spook us, make us cancel the press conference. Or, Evelyn said slowly, it could be someone on the inside of their operation who's realized they're on the losing side and wants out. Before Torres could respond, Agent Park swore at his computer. We've got movement. The Richmond County Sheriff's Department just dispatched 12 units. No destination listed, but they're coordinating on an encrypted channel. Can you crack it? Torres asked. Working on it, but it'll take time. This is military-grade encryption, not standard police comms. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. They're planning something big, probably hoping to arrest me before I can give the press conference claim I'm a fugitive who fled federal custody. You're in federal custody, Torres pointed out. They can't claim that. They can claim anything. The question is whether people believe it. Evelyn began pacing. We need to flip the script. Instead of waiting for them to make their move, we make ours first. The press conference isn't for another hour. So we move it up. We go live right now. We stream it online, get it out to every platform simultaneously. By the time their sheriff's units arrive, the evidence will already be public. Torres considered this for maybe 3 seconds, then started issuing orders. Park set up the live stream. Cortez, contact all media outlets and tell them we're going live in 10 minutes. Reeves, I want armed agents at every entrance to this building. If Richmond County tries to interfere, they'll find themselves on camera assaulting federal officers. The room exploded into coordinated chaos. Agents moved with practiced efficiency, transforming the conference room into a makeshift press center. 3 cameras were positioned at different angles. Lights were adjusted, microphones tested. Evelyn took a seat at the table, Valerie beside her. Torres would moderate, presenting the federal case, while Evelyn provided the personal testimony and Valerie offered the medical documentation. 2 minutes, Park called out. Evelyn's hands were steady, but her heart was racing. This was the moment she'd been working toward for 3 years. Everything her father's memory, the 37 deaths Valerie had documented, every family that had been silenced, it all came down to the next hour. 1 minute. The door to the conference room burst open. Agent Reeves entered, his face pale. "We've got a situation. Senator Wade just went on Fox News. He's calling this a witch hunt, claiming the DOJ is persecuting honest public servants in Richmond County." "Of course he is," Torres said. "He's part of the network. Let him talk. We've got evidence." "There's more. He's introduced emergency legislation to restrict federal authority in local corruption cases. Says states' rights are being violated by federal overreach." Evelyn felt cold spreading through her chest. This was the play she'd been afraid of, using political power to create legal roadblocks, turning the investigation into a partisan issue, muddying the waters, until people forgot that the actual question was simple. Did these officials break the law? "How much support does he have?" Torres asked. "Early polling suggests significant Republican support. They're framing it as federal government attacking local control." 30 seconds, Park called. Torres made a decision. "We proceed. Once people see the evidence, the political calculations will change. Wade can spin all he wants, but he can't spin recordings of judges and officers discussing murder cover-ups." 10 seconds. Evelyn took a deep breath. She thought about her father, about the last time she'd seen him alive, about the promise she'd made at his grave. She thought about Carla Jennings and her brother Tyon, about Marcus Washington Jr., and the 35 others whose names Valerie had documented. About every family who'd been told their grief didn't matter. 5 seconds. The red light on the camera blinked on. Torres spoke first, her voice calm and authoritative. "Good afternoon. I'm Special Agent Rebecca Torres with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. We're here today to present evidence of a widespread corruption network operating within Richmond County's criminal justice system. This network has resulted in the deaths of at least 37 people, the falsification of official documents, and the systematic violation of civil rights over a period of nearly 2 decades. She paused, letting that sink in for the viewers already tuning in by the thousands. Beside me is Evelyn Bell, a special investigator with the Department of Justice, who has spent 3 years embedded in Richmond County documenting this corruption. Also joining us is Valerie Santos, a registered nurse who worked in the Richmond County Jail and who kept detailed records of suspicious inmate deaths. We're going to present evidence that will show a coordinated effort by law enforcement, judicial officials, and political figures to cover up crimes, obstruct justice, and profit from their positions of power. Torres nodded to Evelyn. This was it. Evelyn looked directly into the camera, imagining the faces watching people in living rooms, on phones, in offices. People who'd never thought about corruption, who'd trusted the system, who'd believed the comforting lie that authority equaled legitimacy. "My name is Evelyn Bell," she began. 17 years ago, my father, Thomas Bell, was arrested for a broken taillight by Officer James Dale. My father died in custody that night. The official cause of death was ruled as justified use of force. The case was sealed. My family was told there was nothing to investigate. Her voice didn't shake. 3 years of practice of holding these words inside while maintaining cover had made them sharp and clean. But there was something to investigate. There were recordings of the officers discussing the cover-up. There was an autopsy showing injuries inconsistent with the official report. There was a pattern of similar deaths that had been systematically buried. So I became a lawyer. I joined the Department of Justice, and I spent 3 years gathering evidence to prove what I knew in my heart. My father was murdered, and the people who killed him had been doing it for years. She held up the flash drive. This contains recordings of Judge Marcus Hollowell and Officer James Dale discussing my father's death, discussing how they'd covered it up, discussing other cases they'd handled the same way. I'm going to play a portion of these recordings now. I want viewers to understand this isn't speculation. This isn't he said, she said. This is their own words captured during my time working undercover in Judge Hollowell's chambers. Evelyn pressed play. Hollowell's voice tinny but clear. "The Bell case is getting media attention. We need to shut it down." Dale. "Already handled. Autopsy report's been edited. Security footage from the cell block has been corrupted. Without physical evidence, it's just his daughter's word against ours." Hollowell with a laugh in his voice. "How many does that make this year?" Dale 7. "But Bell's the first one with a family who won't stop asking questions." "Then make them stop asking." The recording continued, and Evelyn watched the live stream's viewer count climbing. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. The numbers accelerated as people shared the link as the story spread through social media as cable news networks picked up the feed. When the recording ended, the silence in the conference room felt sacred, like the moment after a funeral when everyone was trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Valerie spoke next, her voice stronger than Evelyn had heard it. "I'm a nurse. I took an oath to do no harm. But for 6 years I watched harm happen and did nothing because I was afraid. Afraid of losing my job. Afraid of retaliation. Afraid of ending up like the people whose deaths I was documenting." She opened her folder, held up a death certificate. Marcus Washington Jr., age 27. Official cause of death, accidental fall. Actual cause, blunt force trauma from repeated beatings. I know because I treated his injuries before he died. I was told to list it as accidental. Another certificate. Tyon Carter, age 19. Official cause, suicide by drug overdose. But the blood I drew from Tyon was clean. Someone contaminated the samples after I sent them to the lab. One by one, Valerie went through the names 37 people who'd died while the system looked away. With each name, the viewer count grew. 100,000. 200,000. Major networks were interrupting their regular programming to carry the press conference live. This was the moment corruption died in the light. Agent Park suddenly held up his hand, listening to something through his earpiece. His face went white. "Sheriff's units are converging on this location. ETA 3 minutes. Torres didn't miss a beat. "Let them come. The whole country is watching. If they want to add assaulting federal officers and obstruction of justice to their charges, they're welcome to try." But Evelyn saw something in Park's expression that suggested the situation was worse than a simple confrontation. "What else?" she asked. Park hesitated, then said quietly, "They have a warrant, signed by Judge Caldwell. Claims this building is harboring a fugitive youth and authorizing them to enter by force if necessary." Torres's jaw tightened. "That warrant is worthless. This is federal property. Tell that to 12 sheriff's units with battering rams." Through the window, Evelyn could see the first vehicles arriving. Not just sheriff's cars, but SWAT vehicles, armored trucks enough force to stage a small war. And leading them, emerging from a tactical vehicle with full body armor, was Officer James Dale. Officer James Dale stood outside the federal building in full tactical gear, the body armor making him look more like a soldier preparing for war than a cop serving a warrant. Behind him, 12 sheriff's units had formed a perimeter, their lights painting the street in alternating red and blue. But what made Evelyn's blood run cold wasn't the show of force. It was the way Dale was staring directly at the camera positioned in the window, his expression somewhere between rage and triumph. He knew they were broadcasting live. He wanted to be seen. "Agent Torres," Evelyn said quietly, not taking her eyes off Dale. "He's not here to arrest me. He's here to make this go away by any means necessary." Torres was already on her phone, her voice clipped and urgent. "This is Special Agent Torres, FBI badge number 4721. I have a credible threat situation at the Baker Street facility. Requesting immediate federal backup and advising hostile local law enforcement attempting to breach federal property." Through the window, Dale raised a megaphone. His voice carried across the street, amplified and distorted. "This is Officer James Dale, Richmond County Sheriff's Department. We have a warrant for the arrest of Evelyn Bell. You have 5 minutes to surrender her, or we will enter the building by force." "He can't do that," Valerie whispered, her hands gripping the table. This is federal property. He has no authority here. Authority is what you can enforce, Evelyn said. And right now he's got 12 units, and we've got maybe 8 agents in this building. He's betting that if he moves fast enough, violently enough, he can shut down the press conference before the evidence spreads too far. Agent Park was frantically typing. Viewer count just hit 500,000. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, they're all carrying this live. Social media is exploding. The hashtag Justice for Thomas is trending #1 worldwide. Torres moved to stand beside Evelyn, positioning herself in frame. Keep the cameras rolling. If they breach this building, I want every second documented. I want the world to see federal agents defending the law against corrupt local police. Dale's voice came through the megaphone again. 4 minutes. Evelyn made a decision. She walked to the window where Dale could see her clearly, and opened it. The cold afternoon air rushed in, along with the sound of sirens and shouting. She leaned out slightly, her voice carrying without amplification. "Officer Dale," she called down. "The whole country is watching right now. Hundreds of thousands of people just heard you and Judge Hollowell discuss covering up my father's death. They heard you laugh about it. What exactly do you think you're going to accomplish here?" Dale lowered the megaphone, and Evelyn could see his jaw working. For a moment, she thought he might actually walk away, might realize that every move he made now was being broadcast to an audience that was growing exponentially. Then he smiled. It was the same smile he'd worn in the courtroom that morning, when he'd grabbed her collar, the smile of a predator who'd never faced real consequences, and couldn't imagine starting now. "I think," Dale shouted up without the megaphone, his voice raw and angry, "that I'm going to arrest a fraud who's been impersonating a federal officer and spreading lies about good people who've dedicated their lives to serving this community." "Good people," Evelyn repeated. "Is that what you call yourselves? You beat my father to death and called it justified. You've killed 37 people in 6 years and falsified every report. You've taken bribes, destroyed evidence, and corrupted every institution that was supposed to provide justice. And you have the audacity to call yourselves good people?" The street had gone silent. Even the sheriff's deputies behind Dale seemed frozen, uncertain. This wasn't the narrative they'd been fed. They'd been told they were arresting a dangerous criminal, not confronting someone who was broadcasting evidence of systemic corruption to the world. Dale's face flushed red. 3 minutes. Torres pulled Evelyn back from the window. "We need to continue the press conference. Every second we keep broadcasting is another nail in their coffin." They returned to the table. Evelyn's hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up to 3 years of controlled fear and suppressed rage. She took a breath, faced the camera. "What you're seeing right now is how corruption defends itself," she said, her voice steady, despite everything. "When evidence threatens power, power doesn't submit to justice, it tries to silence the evidence. Officer Dale is outside this building with tactical units because he knows that once people hear the truth, his career is over. Judge Hollowell's career is over. District Attorney Langston's career is over. Their entire network collapses." She held up another document. This is a financial record showing a payment of $250,000 from an offshore account registered to District Attorney Mitchell Langston to an LLC owned by Senator Marcus Wade. The payment was made 3 days after Wade introduced legislation that would have made it harder to prosecute police corruption cases. That's not a coincidence. That's a bribe. Agent Park's computer chimed. "Breaking news, Senator Wade just issued a statement denying any connection to Langston. Says the account must be fraudulent." "Of course he does," Torres said. "Let's show him it's not." Evelyn pulled up bank records on the conference room screen, timestamps, and transaction details clearly visible. This payment was made on March 15, 2023. Same day that Langston's office received a federal inquiry about sealed case files. The money went through 3 intermediary accounts, but the digital trail is clear. We've traced it. We've documented it. Senator Wade took $250,000 to protect corruption. The viewer count hit 700,000. Dale's voice cut through again. No megaphone this time, just shouting. 2 minutes. I'm giving you 2 minutes to send out Evelyn Bell, or we're coming in. Valerie stood suddenly, her chair scraping back. I have something else to add. Her voice was shaking, but determined. Officer Dale threatened me specifically. 6 months ago, he came to the medical unit after an inmate died, a man named Malik Jones. Malik had been beaten so badly, his jaw was broken in 3 places. Dale told me to list the cause of death as a fall during a seizure. When I hesitated, he said, "Remember what happened to Thomas Bell. Accidents happen to people who ask too many questions." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. This wasn't just corruption. This was an overt threat, a direct line connecting Dale to a pattern of violence and intimidation spanning nearly 2 decades. "You have a recording of this?" Torres asked. Valerie shook her head. "No, but I have the death certificate I was forced to sign. And I have the original autopsy report that shows injuries inconsistent with a seizure-related fall. And I have text messages from Dale the next day, thanking me for my cooperation and reminding me that loyal employees get protected." She pulled out her phone, began scrolling through messages. Agent Park immediately moved to document them, his camera capturing each threatening text, each veiled warning, each piece of evidence showing how Dale had maintained control through fear. Outside, the sound of a battering ram being positioned echoed up from the street. 1 minute. Dale's voice was almost gleeful now. He thought he was winning. Torres spoke into the camera with absolute calm. "What you're about to witness is local law enforcement under the direction of officers who are themselves under federal investigation, attempting to breach federal property and assault federal agents in order to silence testimony about their crimes. Remember this moment. Remember what power looks like when it's threatened." The front door to the building shuddered with the first impact of the battering ram. The sound was like thunder metal on metal, violence barely restrained. Second impact. The door held but wouldn't last long. Evelyn looked at Torres. "We need to buy time. Federal backup. How far out?" 10 minutes minimum, Torres said. "Metro police are en route, but they might be compromised too. We're on our own." Third impact. The door frame cracked. Agent Reeves appeared in the doorway, his weapon drawn. "They're coming through. I've got 3 agents at the entrance, but we're outnumbered 4-1. Orders?" Torres's face was stone. "Nobody fires unless fired upon. This is being broadcast live. I want clean rules of engagement. They want to make us look like the aggressors. We don't give them the satisfaction." Fourth impact. The door gave way. The sound of boots on stairs, multiple people moving fast. Evelyn could hear Dale's voice shouting commands, organizing his units like a military operation. "Keep the cameras on the door," Torres ordered. "I want everything on record." The conference room door burst open. Officer Dale entered first, followed by 4 SWAT officers in full tactical gear, weapons raised. They swept the room with professional efficiency, targeting each person, establishing control. But they froze when they saw the cameras. The live broadcast, the viewer count now approaching 1 million people watching in real time. Dale's eyes locked on Evelyn. For a moment, everything else fell away. The cameras, the other people, the federal agents. It was just the 2 of them, separated by 17 years and 37 bodies, and a system that had protected him while it crushed her. "Evelyn Bell," Dale said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "You're under arrest for fraud, impersonation of a federal officer, and resisting arrest." "I'm a federal investigator operating under DOJ authorization," Evelyn said calmly. "You have no jurisdiction here, and every second you remain in this building, you're committing a federal crime in front of 1 million witnesses." Dale pulled out handcuffs. "I have a warrant signed by a judge. That's all the jurisdiction I need." "A warrant signed by Judge Caldwell," Torres interjected, stepping between Dale and Evelyn. "A judge who is himself under federal investigation. That warrant is worthless." "Step aside, Agent Torres," Dale said. "This is a local matter. The hell it is. Torres didn't move. You're standing in a federal building threatening a federal investigation, attempting to arrest someone under federal protection. The only local matter here is how many years you're going to spend in federal prison. The SWAT officers exchanged glances. They were professionals, trained to follow orders, but even they could sense the wrongness of this situation. One of them, a younger man whose name tag read Morrison, no relation to the courthouse guard, lowered his weapon slightly. "Officer Dale," Morrison said carefully, "maybe we should wait for clarity on jurisdiction before we—" "I gave you an order, Morrison." Dale spun on him. "You lower that weapon and you're off this team. With all due respect, sir, this is being broadcast live. If we arrest federal agents on camera, then we arrest them on camera." Dale's control was slipping, his voice rising to something close to a shout. These people have been spreading lies about good officers, about judges who've served this community for decades. They're destroying careers based on fabricated evidence and conspiracy theories. We're not going to stand here and let them— "Fabricated evidence." Evelyn's voice cut through Dale's rant like a blade. "You want to talk about fabricated evidence? Let's talk about the autopsy report you edited on my father. Let's talk about the security footage you corrupted. Let's talk about the 37 death certificates that Nurse Santos was forced to falsify under your threats." She pulled out her phone, held it up. "I've got your voice on recording, Dale. Hours of it. Want me to play more? Want the world to hear you discussing which inmates were worth protecting and which ones were acceptable losses? Want them to hear you laughing about families who couldn't afford lawyers to fight back?" Dale's hand moved toward his service weapon. It was an unconscious gesture, muscle memory, from years of using force to solve problems, but every camera in the room caught it. Agent Reeves's weapon came up instantly, trained on Dale. "Don't." The moment crystallized. 4 SWAT officers with weapons, 3 federal agents armed and ready, 2 civilians in the crossfire, and 1 million people watching to see if this would end in bloodshed or surrender. Dale's hand hovered near his weapon for 3 eternal seconds. Then slowly, he moved it away. "Smart choice," Torres said. "Now here's what's going to happen. You and your units are going to leave this building. You're going to return to Richmond County and wait for federal agents to come find you. Because, make no mistake, Officer Dale, you're under arrest, not by Richmond County, but by the United States government. And there's no corrupt judge who can make those charges disappear." Dale's jaw clenched so hard, Evelyn could hear his teeth grinding. "This isn't over." "You're right," Evelyn said. "It's not, because I'm going to spend every day of your trial testifying about what you did. Every family you destroyed, every life you took, every person you threatened into silence. And when you're finally convicted, when you're sitting in a federal prison cell, I want you to think about my father. I want you to remember that he died begging for help. And I want you to know that his daughter made sure he didn't die for nothing." Dale turned to leave, his SWAT team following. But at the door, he stopped. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost conversational. "You think you've won. You think because you've got recordings and documents and witnesses that justice will happen. But you don't understand how deep this goes, how many people are invested in protecting the system. You're one investigator with a vendetta. We're an institution." "You were an institution," Evelyn corrected. "Now you're just defendants." The SWAT units retreated down the stairs, their boots echoing in the stairwell. Through the window, Evelyn watched them emerge onto the street, saw Dale conferring with other officers, saw the beginning of disorganization as the reality of their situation penetrated their certainty. Agent Park was already on his computer pulling up news coverage. Every major network is running this as breaking news. Armed police storm federal building during corruption testimony. The narrative's shifting. Public opinion is turning. Evelyn's phone erupted with notifications. Text messages from numbers she didn't recognize, emails flooding, and social media mentions climbing into the thousands. She opened one email randomly. "Ms. Bell, my name is Jennifer Okafor. My brother died in Richmond County Jail 8 years ago. They said it was suicide, but David would never. I've been too afraid to speak up. After watching your press conference, I'm ready to testify. I have evidence. Another email. This is Robert Chen. I was a prosecutor in Richmond County until I refused to drop charges against one of Dale's informants. They forced me out, destroyed my reputation. I kept copies of the cases they made me bury. I'm ready to come forward. One after another, the messages poured in. People who'd been silenced, intimidated, threatened. People who'd been waiting for someone brave enough to take the first stand so they could find the courage to take theirs. Torres. Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. We're getting dozens of witness offers. People are coming forward. Torres nodded, something like satisfaction crossing her face. That's how it works. Once the dam breaks, once people see that speaking up won't get them killed, they start talking. And once they start, they don't stop. Valerie was crying quietly, reading messages on her own phone. Other nurses are reaching out. People who worked in the jail, in the hospitals, who saw things but were too afraid to report. They're all saying the same thing, they're ready to testify. The press conference had transformed from a presentation of evidence into something larger, a moment of collective unburdening, a shared recognition that silence had protected corruption for too long, and that truth once released had its own momentum. Agent Park held up his phone, his expression shocked. You need to see this. Senator Wade just resigned. Put out a statement saying he's stepping down to deal with personal matters. No admission of guilt, but he knows what's coming, Torres finished. He's trying to get ahead of the indictment. Evelyn felt a surge of something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't quite relief either. Wade's resignation was a victory, but it didn't bring back her father. It didn't erase 17 years of grief. It didn't heal the families of 37 people who died in cells while their cries for help were ignored. We need to keep going, she said. Wade's just one piece. The whole network needs to fall. For the next 30 minutes, they continued the press conference. Evelyn played more recordings, presented more financial documents, connected more dots in the conspiracy that had corrupted Richmond County's justice system from the ground up. Then Agent Park received a call that changed everything. It's the Attorney General's office, he said, putting the call on speaker. A woman's voice came through, crisp and authoritative. This is Assistant Attorney General Monica Reyes. Am I speaking with Special Agent Torres? Yes, ma'am. Agent Torres, I'm calling to inform you that the Department of Justice is officially taking over all investigations and prosecutions related to the Richmond County corruption case. We're assigning a task force of 30 agents, we're bringing in federal prosecutors, and we're going to dismantle this network piece by piece. Torres closed her eyes, briefly, relief visible on her face. Thank you, ma'am. We have multiple witnesses coming forward, significant evidence compiled. We've been watching the press conference. Reyes interrupted. The whole department has been watching. What Special Investigator Bell has accomplished here is extraordinary. We're going to make sure her work results in convictions that stick. Evelyn leaned toward the phone. Ma'am, this is Evelyn Bell. There are families who've been waiting years for justice. Decades in some cases. We need to move fast before the network has time to destroy more evidence or intimidate more witnesses. Already in motion, Ms. Bell. We have teams executing warrants as we speak. Judge Hollowell's chambers, District Attorney Langston's office, Officer Dale's residence. We're seizing computers, financial records, communication logs. By this time tomorrow, we'll have more evidence than we know what to do with. A new notification appeared on Agent Park's screen. Federal agents have entered the Richmond County Courthouse. They're escorting Judge Caldwell out in handcuffs. The viewer count on the live stream hit 1.5 million. Evelyn thought about her father, about the moment she'd learned he was dead, about the rage and grief that had driven her through 3 years of dangerous undercover work. She thought about every family who'd been told their loved one's death was justified, accidental, inevitable. Ma'am, Evelyn said carefully, I want to be there when they arrest Dale. I need to be there. Silence on the line. Then, "That's highly irregular. You're a witness now, not an investigator in the field." "I understand. But my father died in his hands. I need to look Dale in the eye when he realizes that this time, finally, there are consequences." Another pause. "I'll see what I can arrange." The call ended. Torres looked at Evelyn with concern and understanding mixed. "You sure about this?" "I've been sure about this for 17 years. Agent Cortez entered the conference room slightly out of breath. "Federal backup just arrived. 20 agents, tactical support the works. Baker Street is locked down tighter than Fort Knox now." "Where's Dale?" Torres asked. "Gone. His units dispersed about 5 minutes ago. But we've got surveillance on his known locations. The moment he surfaces, we'll have him." Evelyn's phone rang. Another unknown number, but this one felt different. She answered. "Ms. Bell." A male voice, older, shaking slightly. "My name is Arthur Pemberton. I was a public defender in Richmond County for 30 years. I retired 5 years ago after Judge Hollowell threatened my family. I have files. Boxes of files documenting cases where evidence was suppressed, where defendants were coerced into plea deals for crimes they didn't commit, where the whole system was rigged against anyone who couldn't afford to fight back." Evelyn grabbed a pen. "Mr. Pemberton, where are you?" "I'm at home. I've been watching your press conference. I've been crying for the past hour because I thought I was alone. I thought what I knew didn't matter because no one would believe me over a judge. We believe you, and we need those files. I'll bring them to you. All of them. Everything I've been too afraid to show anyone for 5 years." Another crack in the dam. Another witness stepping forward. Another piece of evidence emerging from the darkness where it had been hidden by fear. The press conference continued for another hour. More recordings played, more documents presented, more witnesses calling in with testimony. By the time Torres finally ended the live stream, the viewer count had peaked at 2 million people. 2 million witnesses to the dismantling of corruption. Agent Reeves approached Evelyn as she was gathering her materials. "There's someone here to see you. Says she knew your father." Evelyn's heart skipped. She followed Reeves to a small office where an elderly black woman sat waiting. Her hands folded in her lap, her eyes red from crying. "Ms. Bell," the woman said, standing. "I'm Dorothy Hayes. I was working as a dispatcher the night your father was arrested. I heard Officer Dale's radio calls, heard your father begging for help. I tried to send medical assistance, but my supervisor overrode me. Said Dale had the situation under control." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "You heard him?" "Every word, every plea. And I've carried that guilt for 17 years because I didn't fight harder. Didn't call an ambulance anyway. Didn't do something more." Tears streamed down Dorothy's face. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Evelyn took the woman's hands. "It wasn't your fault. The system was designed to protect officers like Dale, not people like my father. You tried to help. That's more than most people did." "I have the radio logs," Dorothy said. "I kept copies. Against regulations, but I couldn't destroy them. Couldn't erase evidence of what happened." Another piece of evidence. Another witness. Another truth that had been buried surfacing into the light. The scope of what they'd accomplished was starting to sink in. This wasn't just about Richmond County anymore. News of the press conference was spreading nationally, sparking conversations about police corruption, qualified immunity, the failures of oversight systems. Other cities were starting to look at their own cases, their own sealed files, their own suspicious deaths in custody. One investigation had become a movement. Agent Torres found Evelyn an hour later. "We've located Dale. He's at his brother's house in Virginia, just across the state line. Federal team is assembling to execute the arrest warrant. Assistant AG Reyes approved your request. You can be there if you want." Evelyn looked out the window at the city where her father had died, where she'd spent 3 years pretending to be someone else while building a case that would honor his memory. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossibly beautiful after such a brutal day. "I want to be there," she said. The drive to Virginia took 90 minutes through twilight that gradually deepened into full darkness. Evelyn sat in the back of Agent Torres's SUV watching streetlights blur past while her mind replayed the past 17 years in fragments. Her father's funeral, her first day of law school, the moment she'd been accepted into the DOJ, every step that had led to this night. Agent Reeves drove while Torres coordinated with the tactical team already surrounding Dale's brother's house. The radio chatter was constant professional, the language of people who'd done this hundreds of times and knew exactly how dangerous cornered men could become. "Subject is inside second floor north-facing room," came a voice through the speaker. "Visual confirmation via thermal imaging. No other heat signatures in the building." "His brother's not home?" Torres asked. "Brother is currently being interviewed by agents in Richmond. He cooperated, gave us keys and the security code. Says Dale called him 3 hours ago asking for a place to hide." Evelyn's phone buzzed. A text from Carla Jennings. "Watching the news. They're saying Dale's about to be arrested. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on Tyon." Another text from a number she didn't recognize. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. My husband died in Richmond jail 9 years ago. I've been too afraid to speak. Not anymore. I'm ready to testify." The messages kept coming, a flood of grief and gratitude and courage that had been dammed up for years. Each notification was another person stepping out of the shadows, another voice joining the chorus that demanded accountability. "We're 2 minutes out," Reeves said, slowing as they approached a suburban neighborhood that looked startlingly normal. Well-kept lawns, houses with porch lights, on the kind of place where people raised families and believed in the fundamental goodness of the world. The tactical vehicles were parked 3 blocks away, agents in position around the target house. Torres led Evelyn to the mobile command center, where the operations commander, a grizzled veteran named Captain Malcolm Torres, no relation, was studying blueprints. "Special Agent Torres," Malcolm said with a nod. "This is the witness." "Special Investigator Evelyn Bell," Torres introduced. "She's the one who built the case against Dale." Malcolm studied Evelyn for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he extended his hand. "My son was a public defender in Richmond County. Got run out of his job 5 years ago after he tried to file complaints against Judge Hollowell. Thank you for what you did today." Evelyn shook his hand, feeling the weight of yet another family touched by the corruption she'd spent 3 years documenting. "Is your son safe?" "He moved to California, started over. But he shouldn't have had to run. That's why I volunteered for this operation." Malcolm turned back to the blueprints. "Dale's in a second-floor bedroom, northeast corner. Only one exit from that room, the door to the hallway. Windows are 30 feet up, no easy escape. We've got snipers positioned, but the goal is to take him alive. We want him in court, not in a grave." "What's the entry plan?" Torres asked. "Negotiation first. We call him, give him the option to surrender peacefully. If he refuses, we breach. But I'm guessing a man like Dale doesn't surrender easily." As if on cue, Malcolm's phone rang. The tech team had Dale's number, had been ready to make contact. Malcolm put the call on speaker and dialed. It rang 4 times before Dale answered. "Yeah." "Officer Dale, this is Captain Malcolm Torres, FBI Hostage Rescue Team. You're surrounded by federal agents. We have a warrant for your arrest. I need you to come out with your hands visible, no weapons." Silence on the line, then a laugh, harsh and bitter. "Federal agents, of course. You people never know when to stop." "This can end peacefully, Officer Dale. You walk out, you get processed, you get your day in court. No one needs to get hurt." "My day in court," Dale's voice rose. "My day in court with a federal prosecutor who's already decided I'm guilty, a jury that's been watching doctored recordings and listening to lies from people with grudges. That's not a court, that's a lynching." Evelyn grabbed a headset, cutting into the conversation before Torres could stop her. "This is Evelyn Bell, Dale. You remember me. You grabbed me by the collar this morning. You threatened Valerie Santos. You killed my father." "Bell." Dale's voice changed, becoming almost conversational. "I wondered if you'd be here. Couldn't resist watching the big arrest, could you?" "I wanted to ask you a question." Evelyn said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Did you know my father had a heart condition? Did you know that stress could kill him? When he was begging for help, begging you to call a doctor? Did you know he was dying? The line was quiet for so long that Evelyn thought Dale had hung up. Then, I knew. The admission hit like a physical blow. Evelyn had suspected, had theorized, had built cases around the evidence. But hearing Dale confirm it, hearing him admit that he'd knowingly let her father die, transformed suspicion into certainty, theory into truth. Why? The word came out broken. Because men like your father think they can talk back to cops, think they can question authority, think the law applies to everyone equally. Someone needed to teach him different. Someone needed to show him who really has power. Dale paused. I didn't expect his daughter to spend 17 years trying to prove a point. I'm not proving a point, Evelyn said. I'm proving the truth. And the truth is, you're a murderer who hid behind a badge. The truth, Dale laughed again, is that everything I did was legal. Every arrest, every use of force, every decision I made, it was all within policy, all approved by supervisors, all protected by qualified immunity. You think you've won because you got me on tape. Those recordings just show officers doing their jobs. The system will protect its own bell. It always has. Malcolm muted the call, turned to Evelyn. He's baiting you. Don't engage. But Torres shook her head. Let her talk. Dale's revealing things he might not say to us. Keep him talking, Bell. Get him to admit more. Evelyn unmuted. The system's changing, Dale. Right now there are federal agents arresting Judge Hollowell, District Attorney Langston, Judge Caldwell. Every person who helped you cover up those deaths. Senator Wade already resigned. The network you thought was untouchable is falling apart. Then I'll take them all down with me, Dale said, and there was something new in his voice now, desperation mixed with spite. You think I'm the only one with recordings? You think I trusted those people enough not to document their involvement? I've got insurance, Bell. Files that prove Hollowell, Langston, Caldwell. They were all in on it from the beginning. Files that show payments going higher than you've investigated. Files that connect this network to state officials, federal judges, people whose names would make your head spin. Agent Park, monitoring from the command center, looked up sharply. He's talking about evidence we don't have. He's admitting to a broader conspiracy. Keep him talking, Malcolm said urgently. If he's got documentation of higher-level corruption, we need to know where it is before he destroys it. Where are these files, Dale? Evelyn asked. Wouldn't you like to know? Maybe they're in a safe deposit box. Maybe they're with a lawyer who has instructions to release them if I'm arrested. Maybe they're already on their way to WikiLeaks. Dale was enjoying this now, the power of withheld information. You wanted to dismantle the network, congratulations. When my files go public, half the state government goes down with me. Then release them, Evelyn challenged. If you really have proof of corruption going that high, if you really want to expose the system, release the files. Or are you just bluffing? The silence stretched. Evelyn could almost hear Dale's mind working, calculating whether his bluff would hold. I want a deal, he finally said. Full immunity in exchange for everything I have. Names, dates, payments, the whole network. I walk away clean. You get to be a hero who exposed corruption at the highest levels. Malcolm shook his head. No immunity, not for someone who killed 37 people. But Evelyn had a different idea. What if we offer partial immunity, reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation? You give us everything you testify, you help us take down the network, and instead of life in prison, you get 20 years. You'd be out when you're 62. Bell, Torres said warningly, but Evelyn held up a hand. You want justice for those deaths? Dale's voice was calculating now. You want to make sure everyone who helped me pays. Then I'm your only path to the top of this pyramid. Otherwise, you get me and a few judges, but the people who really run this system walk away clean. Malcolm muted again. We can't offer him a deal. The families of his victims. The families want everyone responsible held accountable. Evelyn interrupted. If Dale's telling the truth, If he has evidence of state-level corruption, we need it. We can always revoke immunity if he's lying. Torres considered this. I need to call the assistant AG. This is above my authority. While Torres made the call, Evelyn watched the house through the command center monitors. Dale was in that bedroom alone, probably armed, definitely dangerous. But he was also scared. She could hear it in his voice beneath the bravado. He knew his world was ending. Torres returned. Reyes says we can offer reduced sentencing in exchange for full cooperation and verified evidence. But the evidence has to be real, has to be substantial, and he has to testify against everyone in the network. Evelyn unmuted the call. Dale, we can offer you a deal. 25 years instead of life without parole. But you give us everything. Every name, every payment, every piece of documentation. And you testify. 30 years minimum, Torres added. And if any of your information is false, the deal's void, and you face every charge. More silence. Then, the files are in a storage unit in Baltimore. Unit 156 Metro Storage on Frederick Avenue. The key is taped under the bathroom sink in this house. Everything's there. Recordings, financial records, photographs. Enough to take down 3 state senators, 2 federal judges, and half the Richmond County government. Agent Park was already coordinating with Baltimore field office. We'll have agents there in 20 minutes. Come out, Dale, Malcolm said. Hands up unarmed. You cooperate now, the deal stands. You make this difficult, all bets are off. Another long pause. Evelyn found herself holding her breath, waiting to see if Dale would actually surrender, or if this would end with tactical teams breaching the house. The front door opened. Dale emerged in jeans and a t-shirt, his hands raised, no weapon visible. He looked smaller somehow, without the uniform and body armor, without the institutional power that had shielded him for 2 decades. Agents moved in immediately, weapons-trained voices commanding him to his knees. Dale complied, and within 30 seconds he was face down on the lawn, hands cuffed behind his back, surrounded by federal agents. Evelyn walked out of the command center, Torres close behind her. She approached the perimeter, slowly watching as Dale was searched, processed, read his rights. When the agents pulled him to his feet, his eyes found hers. For the first time in 17 years, Evelyn looked at the man who'd killed her father without fear, without rage. Just clarity. My father's name was Thomas Bell, she said quietly. Every day of your sentence, I want you to remember his name. I want you to remember Tyon Carter, Marcus Washington Jr., Malik Jones. All 37 people whose lives you took. Their names matter more than yours ever will. Dale's face crumpled. Whether it was genuine remorse or just the reality of consequences finally catching up, Evelyn couldn't tell and didn't care. They loaded him into a federal transport vehicle. As it pulled away, Evelyn felt Torres's hand on her shoulder. You did it, Torres said. You actually did it. Evelyn's phone rang. Agent Park. Bell, the Baltimore team just accessed the storage unit. It's real. Dale wasn't bluffing. We've got documentation of corruption going back 15 years involving state legislators, federal appointees, even a retired U.S. attorney. This is massive. The scope of what they'd uncovered was almost incomprehensible. What had started as one woman investigating her father's death had exposed a network of corruption that had infected multiple levels of government. The following weeks became a blur of depositions, hearings, and arrests. The evidence from Dale's storage unit led to 17 additional indictments, including 3 sitting state senators and a federal magistrate judge. Each arrest triggered more witnesses coming forward, more evidence surfacing, more threads of the network unraveling. Judge Hollowell was the first to go to trial. The courtroom where he'd presided for 19 years became the venue for his downfall. Evelyn testified for 3 days, walking the jury through every piece of evidence, every recording, every document that proved Hollowell had corrupted the system from the bench. On the 4th day, Carla Jennings took the stand. She spoke about Tyon, about the brother who'd wanted to study engineering, who'd never even gotten a phone call before he died. Her testimony was so powerful that 2 jurors were openly crying. Valerie Santos testified next, presenting her medical documentation of 37 deaths. Each name, each falsified report, each moment she'd been forced to choose between her conscience and her career. The defense tried to discredit her, but they couldn't explain away the physical evidence, the autopsy reports that contradicted official causes of death. Mr. Jerome Washington testified about his son Marcus Jr., about 8 years of being told there was nothing to investigate, nothing to pursue, nothing that mattered more than protecting the officers involved. He looked directly at Hollowell when he said, "You took my son twice, once when he died, and again when you sealed the case so I couldn't even know the truth." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts guilty. Hollowell showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but Evelyn saw his hands shaking as the bailiffs led him away. District Attorney Langston's trial followed 3 weeks later. The financial evidence was overwhelming: $3 million in bribes, documented payments to offshore accounts, money laundering through shell corporations. But it was Dale's testimony that sealed Langston's fate. Dale took the stand and methodically described how the corruption network functioned. Langston coordinated with Hollowell to determine which cases got prosecuted and which got buried. Payments came through intermediaries, usually disguised as consulting fees or campaign contributions. Officers like Dale provided the muscle intimidating witnesses and destroying evidence, and politicians like Senator Wade provided legislative protection, passing laws that made it harder to prosecute police corruption. It was a perfect system. Dale testified, his voice flat and emotionless. Everyone got paid, everyone got protected, and anyone who tried to fight back got crushed. It worked for 20 years because we controlled every level: police, prosecutors, judges, politicians. We were untouchable. Until Evelyn Bell, the prosecutor said. Dale looked across the courtroom to where Evelyn sat in the gallery. Until Evelyn Bell. Langston was convicted on 18 counts. The sentence was 35 years in federal prison. Senator Wade, despite resigning, was eventually indicted on corruption charges. His trial revealed that he'd taken over $2 million in bribes to block anti-corruption legislation and protect Richmond County officials from federal oversight. His conviction triggered calls for ethics reform at the federal level. But it was Judge Caldwell's trial that brought everything full circle. Caldwell had been the quiet enabler, the judge who'd signed warrants without scrutiny, sealed cases without justification, provided legal cover for the entire network. His defense argued he'd been deceived by the other participants. Then, Evelyn's team presented evidence that Caldwell had been receiving payments since his appointment to the bench 12 years ago. Every major case he'd sealed, every questionable warrant he'd signed, every time he'd ruled in favor of the corruption network, there was a corresponding payment, usually within 72 hours. Arthur Pemberton, the retired public defender, testified about the cases Caldwell had corrupted, the defendants coerced into plea deals for crimes they didn't commit, the evidence that had been suppressed. His 30 years of documentation provided a roadmap of judicial corruption that stretched back further than anyone had realized. Caldwell was convicted and sentenced to 28 years, 8 months after the courtroom confrontation that had started. Everything Evelyn stood in a small storefront in Richmond's historically black neighborhood. The space had been empty for years, but now it was being transformed into something new. Above the door, freshly painted letters read, "The Second Voice Legal Aid Center." Carla Jennings was helping arrange donated furniture, while Valerie Santos organized medical files for a new program offering free healthcare advocacy for families dealing with incarceration. Mr. Jerome Washington had volunteered to handle community outreach, connecting the center with families who needed help navigating the legal system. Dorothy Hayes, the former dispatcher who'd heard Thomas Bell's final pleas, had retired from the police department and now worked as the center's intake coordinator, using her inside knowledge of the system to help others. "Ms. Bell," Carla said, stepping back to admire their work. "Tyon would have loved this. He always talked about wanting to help people. This place, it's helping people the way he would have wanted. Evelyn looked around at the space that would provide free legal representation advocacy and support for families who'd been failed by the system. The walls were covered with photographs of victims, not just the 37 from Richmond County, but dozens of others who'd reached out in the months since the investigation went public. Each face represented a story of injustice, a family seeking accountability, a person whose voice had been silenced by power. "We open next week," Evelyn said. "I've already got 12 cases lined up. Wrongful deaths, excessive force complaints, cases that were buried by corrupt officials. We're going to give people what the system denied them, a fair fight." Torres stopped by that afternoon bringing coffee and news. "Thought you'd want to know we just arrested the last person on Dale's list." Assistant State Attorney General Richard Morrison took bribes to quash investigations into Richmond County. That makes 34 arrests total. 34 people who thought they were untouchable, Evelyn said, and one investigator who proved they weren't. Torres smiled. "How does it feel, being done with the undercover work building something positive instead of just tearing down corruption?" Evelyn considered the question. The grief hadn't disappeared. She still woke up some mornings with her father's voice in her head, still felt the weight of 17 years she couldn't get back. But alongside the grief was something else now, purpose, that extended beyond vengeance, hope that the system could actually change. "It feels like I'm finally doing what my father would have wanted," she said. "He believed in justice, real justice, not the kind that gets dispensed from a bench by someone in robes, but the kind that happens when ordinary people refuse to accept that power trumps truth." A week later, the Second Voice held its grand opening. Over 300 people attended, families of victims, journalists who'd covered the investigation, federal agents who'd worked the cases, community members who'd been waiting years for someone to create a space where their voices mattered. Evelyn stood at a podium, looking out at faces that represented every stage of her journey. Carla Jennings in the front row, Valerie Santos beside her, Mr. Jerome Washington with his church hat slightly tilted, Dorothy Hayes with tears already streaming down her face. 17 years ago, Evelyn began, my father died in a cell begging for help. The system said his death was justified. The courts said there was nothing to investigate. And I was told by people who seemed to have all the power that some cases were too complex for families to understand. She paused, gathering herself. But I understood. I understood that my father was murdered by people who were supposed to protect him. I understood that the system was designed to protect officers, not citizens. And I understood that if I wanted justice, I would have to build it myself. The room was absolutely silent. This center exists because my father's voice was silenced. It exists because Tyon Carter's voice was silenced. Because Marcus Washington Jr.'s voice was silenced. Because 37 people died without anyone listening to their cries for help. We're calling it the Second Voice, because the first voice, the one that begs for justice, often gets ignored. But the second voice, the one that refuses to stop demanding accountability, that's the one that changes systems. She looked directly at the families in attendance, saw her own grief reflected in their faces. To everyone here who's lost someone to corruption, to violence, to a system that valued order over humanity, I see you. Your loved ones' names matter. Their lives mattered. And we're going to make sure the world never forgets that. The applause started slowly, then built to something thunderous. People stood, some crying, some shouting affirmation, all of them carrying grief that had finally found a place to transform into action. That evening, Evelyn drove to the cemetery where her father was buried. She'd been visiting regularly for 17 years, but tonight felt different. Tonight she wasn't coming with rage or grief or desperate promises. She was coming with completion. The grave was simple. Thomas Bell, 1972-2008, beloved father. She'd added a new inscription after the trials ended. Your voice still echoes. "We did it, Dad," Evelyn said softly, kneeling beside the headstone. Dale got 30 years. Hollowell got life. Langston got 35. Everyone who helped cover up your death is in prison. And I opened a center in your name. Well, not your name exactly, but in memory of what they took from you, your voice. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of fresh grass and early spring. "I know you wanted me to be happy to build a life beyond what happened to you. I'm trying. The nightmares are less frequent now. I sleep without waking up every hour checking for threats. I can look at police officers without automatically calculating escape routes." She smiled slightly. "Torres says I'm adjusting. She recommended a therapist who specializes in extended undercover trauma. I'm actually going." A bird landed on the headstone, regarded Evelyn with curious eyes, then flew away. "The center's going to help a lot of people. We've already got 50 families registered for services. Free legal representation, medical advocacy, counseling services. Everything the system should provide but doesn't, especially for people who can't afford lawyers or who've been intimidated into silence." Evelyn traced her fingers over the engraved letters of her father's name. "I miss you every day, you every hour. I missed you at my law school graduation. I missed you when I got my first case. I missed you during every terrifying moment of the investigation when I thought I might not make it out alive. But I also feel you with me. When I'm helping a family get justice, when I'm standing up to someone who thinks power means they're above consequences, I can feel you there, proud of the person I became because I refused to accept that your death was justified." She stood brushing grass from her knees. "Justice doesn't begin in court," she said, repeating the words that had become the center's motto. "It begins the moment the first person stops staying silent. You taught me that, Dad. You died trying to be heard. I've spent 17 years making sure the world listened, and now I'm helping others find their voices too." The sun was setting, painting the cemetery in golden light that made everything look softer, more hopeful. "I love you. I'll keep fighting, and I promise every person who walks into that center, every family seeking justice, every voice that's been silenced, I'll remember that they're fighting the same battle you fought, and this time, they won't have to fight alone." Evelyn walked back to her car, but before she got in, her phone rang. An unknown number, which usually meant another family reaching out. "This is Evelyn Bell." "Ms. Bell, my name is Christina Moore. I'm calling from Seattle. I saw your story, watched the trials. My sister died in police custody 3 years ago. They said it was suicide, but Rachel would never. Could you help me? Could the second voice help families outside Richmond?" Evelyn looked back at her father's grave, at the setting sun, at the world that still needed so much healing. "Yes," she said. "We can help. Tell me about Rachel." And as Christina began to speak, as another voice emerged from silence, Evelyn understood that this was the work that would define the rest of her life. Not vengeance, not anger, but the patient, persistent act of listening to the unheard and amplifying their truths until the whole system had no choice but to change. Justice didn't begin in court. It began the moment someone stopped staying silent and found another person brave enough to help them be heard. Her father had been that first voice. Evelyn had become the second. And now, together with everyone who walked through the doors of the center, bearing her father's legacy, they were creating a chorus too loud to ignore, too persistent to silence, too powerful to suppress. The fight wasn't over. It would never really be over. But tonight, with the sun setting on a day that had seen another family step toward justice, Evelyn Bell felt something she hadn't felt in 17 years.